What happens when the invisible woman serving champagne to Manhattan's most ruthless billionaires isn't who they think she is? When Elena Ward walked into that penthouse party carrying drink trays, every person in that room had already destroyed her once. They'd stolen her company, erased her name, and left her with nothing. But tonight she came back. Not for revenge that would fade, not for money she didn't need anymore. She came back to dismantle an empire, and she'd do it while they laughed at her, mocked her, treated her like she was nothing. Stay with me until the end, hit that like button, and comment what city you're watching from so I can see how far this story travels. The Manhattan skyline glittered like broken glass scattered across black velvet. 73 floors below Adrian Hale's penthouse, the city moved in its usual chaos, horns blaring, people shouting, life grinding forward without pause. Up here, though, everything existed in careful silence. The kind of silence money bought. The kind that made you forget there was a world outside these windows. Adrian stood at the edge of his living room, one hand wrapped around a glass of scotch he hadn't touched in 20 minutes. He wasn't much of a drinker, never had been. But these gatherings, these performances of wealth and influence, demanded certain props. The drink, the tailored Tom Ford suit that cost more than most people made in a month, the expression of vague interest that suggested he belonged here, among these people, in this rarefied air where morality bent to accommodate profit margins. He didn't belong here. He knew that. But his daughter's future demanded he play the part. "Adrian!" A voice cut through the carefully curated jazz drifting from invisible speakers. Marcus Reinhardt, hedge fund manager and serial tax evader, approached with the aggressive confidence of someone who'd never been told no. "Finally dragged yourself out of that tech cave of yours? Thought you'd become a hermit." Adrian forced something resembling a smile. "Just selective about my appearances." "Selective?" Marcus laughed, too loud, drawing glances from the cluster of old money near the Rothko painting Adrian had bought because his decorator insisted it tied the room together. "That's one word for it. Antisocial is another. I prefer discerning." "Discerning. Right." Marcus clapped him on the shoulder with unnecessary force. "Well, discerning or not, you're missing the best part of the evening. Jonathan's about to tell that story about the Indonesian deal. You know, the one where—" He lowered his voice conspiratorially. "Where he convinced the minister that environmental regulations were more like suggestions." Adrian's jaw tightened, but he kept his face neutral. "Sounds fascinating." "It is. The audacity of it. The sheer balls." Marcus was already moving away, gravitating toward the larger group forming near the floor-to-ceiling windows. "Come on, you'll love this." Adrian didn't move. Instead, he watched as the elite of Manhattan's financial district gathered like wolves circling prey, except the prey was any concept of ethics, any remaining shred of accountability. There were 17 people in this room, not counting staff. 17 people who collectively controlled more wealth than several small countries. And every single one of them was dirty in ways that would make front-page news if anyone ever looked close enough. They wouldn't, though. People didn't look at men like these. Men who donated to the right campaigns, sat on the right boards, appeared in the right photographs, wearing the right expressions of philanthropic concern. "Another drink, sir?" The voice was so quiet Adrian almost missed it. He turned, expecting to see Richard, his usual server from the catering company. Instead, a woman stood there, maybe 30, holding a tray of champagne flutes with the kind of careful precision that suggested she'd been doing this a while. Dark hair pulled back in a simple bun, minimal makeup, a server's uniform that somehow looked both perfectly pressed and completely forgettable. But her eyes. There was something in her eyes that didn't match the rest of the picture. "I'm fine, thank you," Adrian said, gesturing to his untouched scotch. She nodded, no smile, no acknowledgement beyond the basic requirement of the transaction. She moved past him toward the group by the windows, and Adrian found himself watching her progress across the room. There was something deliberate about the way she moved, not nervous exactly, not intimidated by the surroundings, just careful. Like every step was measured. "So there I am," Jonathan Westbrook's voice boomed across the space, "sitting across from this government minister who's telling me, and I swear this is word for word, 'Mr. Westbrook, our environmental protection laws are very strict, very strict. Can you imagine?'" Laughter rippled through the group. The woman with the champagne tray had reached them now, standing just outside the circle, waiting for an opening to offer refreshments. And I look at him, Jonathan continued, warming to his story, gesturing with the kind of theatrical flair that came from years of boardroom presentations. And I say, Minister, I completely understand your country's commitment to environmental protection. That's why I'm here. My company shares those same values. Complete bullshit, obviously. But you should have seen his face light up. More laughter. The woman moves slightly closer, trying to navigate the shifting circle of bodies. Then I pull out the proposal. Beautiful document. Cost us 20 grand just for the graphic design. And right there on page 3, buried in the technical specifications section, we've essentially outlined how we're going to dump chemical runoff into 3 different river systems. Jonathan paused for effect. The minister signs it. Doesn't even read past page 1. The laughter this time was uglier, more knowing. Champagne, sir? The woman's voice cut through the noise, offering the tray to Jonathan. He didn't even look at her, just waved a dismissive hand. Not now. She stepped back, but not before Adrian saw something flash across her face. Not anger, not hurt. Something else. Something that looked almost like calculation. Best part, Jonathan was saying, best part is we're still operating that facility. 7 years later. And last month, the minister sends me a personal letter thanking me for our company's commitment to environmental stewardship. He shook his head, delighted by his own cleverness. The world runs on people who don't read the fine print. Adrian's grip on his glass tightened. He'd heard stories like this before, sat through countless dinners and events where powerful men congratulated each other for finding loopholes, exploiting systems, crushing anyone too weak to fight back. Usually, he could compartmentalize it, remind himself why he was here, what he was building, what he needed from these connections. Tonight, it was harder. You're too quiet, Adrian. Veronica Chen appeared at his elbow, carrying what had to be her 4th glass of wine. Chief financial officer of one of the largest private equity firms in the country, reputation for ruthless efficiency and creative accounting that bordered on artistic. Not entertained by Jonathan's greatest hits? Just observing, Adrian said. Observing. She studied him with eyes that missed nothing. That's all you ever do at these things. Watch, listen. Never participate in the main event. The main event? Veronica gestured toward the group, now launching into another story. The honesty. That's what these gatherings are really about, the one place we can be honest about how things actually work. No press, no recordings, no judgment. She took a long sip of wine. Just successful people acknowledging what we all did to get here. And what did you do to get here, Veronica? She smiled, sharp as the blade. Whatever it took. Same as everyone in this room. Her gaze shifted to the woman with the champagne tray who was now serving a couple near the Steinway. Same as anyone who wants to win instead of serve. The contempt in her voice was casual, effortless, the kind that came from years of believing certain people simply mattered more than others. Adrian said nothing. He'd learned that silence often revealed more than questions. You know what I love about New York? Marcus Reinhardt's voice rose above the others, pulling attention back to the windows where the city sprawled beneath them. It's honest about the hierarchy. Look at it out there. Millions of people, all scrambling, all fighting for scraps. And up here, he spread his arms wide. Up here, we make the rules they fight over. Hear, hear, someone called out. Someone, I mean it, Marcus continued, energized by the agreement. We decide which companies succeed, which politicians get funded, which stories get told. And the beautiful thing? Most of them don't even realize it. They think they're making their own choices. The woman with the champagne tray had moved closer to the group again. Adrian watched as she navigated the edges of the conversation, offering drinks that were mostly declined with the kind of absent gestures people reserve for things they don't consider fully human. Speaking of control, Veronica said, did everyone see the Senate vote yesterday? The financial regulation bill? Groans erupted from the group. Dead on arrival, Jonathan said. Just like we knew it would be. Just like we ensured it would be, a man Adrian didn't recognize corrected. Do you know how much we spent killing that thing? The lobbying alone? Worth every penny, Marcus interrupted. Can you imagine? Actual oversight of offshore accounts? They wanted transaction reporting for anything over $10,000. $10,000? I spend that on lunch. Laughter. Always laughter. Like it was all a game. Like the systems they corrupted didn't have actual consequences for actual people. The woman had stopped moving. She stood near the piano now, tray balanced perfectly, but Adrian noticed she'd angled herself so she could see the entire group. See and hear everything. The best part, Veronica was saying, is watching them pretend to care. The populist senators, the reform candidates, they make their speeches, get their sound bites, then quietly vote exactly how we need them to vote. Because at the end of the day, they like their campaigns funded and their districts invested in. It's almost too easy, someone else chimed in. Sometimes I wish they'd put up more of a fight, make it interesting. Adrian's phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out, grateful for the distraction. A text from Maria, his daughter's nanny. She's asking for you, wants to say goodnight. He typed back quickly. Tell her 5 minutes, reading her favorite tonight. His daughter, 4 years old. The only pure thing in his life. The only reason he tolerated rooms like this, people like these. Her mother had died in childbirth, and Adrian had spent the last 4 years building an empire that would give his daughter every advantage, every opportunity, every protection money could buy, even if it meant standing in rooms with people he despised. Earth to Adrian, Veronica waved a hand in front of his face. Where'd you go? Just checking in at home. The daughter, right? How old is she now? 4. Sweet age. Veronica's tone suggested she had no actual opinion on what constituted a sweet age for children. Must be hard doing this alone. I manage. I'm sure you do. Though I have to say, I don't know how you stand it. The single parent thing. God knows I can barely tolerate my own children, and I have a husband to share the burden. Adrian didn't respond. He'd learned that talking about his daughter with people like Veronica only led to uncomfortable observations about nannies and boarding schools and the virtues of outsourcing parental responsibility. A crash shattered the conversation. Everyone turned. Near the entrance to the kitchen, the woman with the champagne tray had frozen. At her feet, a broken glass glittered against the marble floor, red wine spreading in a dark stain. "Oh, for fuck's sake," a voice said. Adrian recognized the speaker. Catherine Aldridge, real estate developer and notorious litigant. She stood 5 feet from the spill, staring down at her dress, a white designer gown that now sported a spectacular splash of Bordeaux across the skirt. "I'm so sorry," the woman said, her voice quiet but clear. "Let me—" "Don't." Catherine held up a hand, her face transforming into something ugly. "Don't touch me, don't come near me. Do you have any idea how much this dress costs?" The room had gone silent. That particular silence that falls when people sense drama unfolding and want to savor every moment. "It was an accident," the woman said. "I can help clean—" "An accident?" Catherine's voice rose. "An accident is bumping into someone. An accident is a small spill. This—" She gestured at the spreading wine stain. "This is incompetence. This is exactly why we can't trust—" "Catherine." Jonathan stepped forward, playing peacemaker but clearly enjoying the spectacle. "I'm sure she didn't mean—" "I don't care what she meant. I care that my $3,000 gown is ruined because this clumsy—" "I said I was sorry." The woman's voice was still quiet, but something in it had changed, hardened. Catherine's eyes narrowed. Sorry doesn't pay for dry cleaning, sorry doesn't replace designer clothing, and sorry definitely doesn't excuse this level of incompetence. She turned to address the room at large, performing now for an audience. This is what happens when you hire cheap labor. This is what happens when you let just anyone into spaces like this. Adrian watched the woman's face. She'd gone very still, and in that stillness, he saw something that made his instincts flare. She wasn't embarrassed, wasn't ashamed. She was waiting. Like this moment was exactly where she needed to be. "I think," Marcus said, voice dripping with false sympathy, "that someone needs to understand their place. Know what I mean?" He looked directly at the woman. "Maybe you should get on your knees, clean up this mess properly, show some respect for the people you're serving." Several voices murmured agreement. The woman didn't move. "Did you hear me?" Marcus stepped closer. "I said get on your knees." "No!" The single word landed like a gunshot. Catherine's face flushed red. "Excuse me?" I said no. The woman set down her tray with careful precision. "I'm not getting on my knees. I'm not cleaning up wine that someone else knocked into my tray. And I'm definitely not taking orders from people who confuse wealth with worth." The silence that followed was different now. Shocked. Uncertain. Who the hell do you think you are? Veronica demanded. The woman smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. I'm someone who's been listening very carefully tonight, she said, to every story about environmental violations, every confession about offshore accounts, every casual admission of corruption and fraud. She pulled something from her pocket. A phone, Adrian realized. And I'm someone who's been recording every word. Marcus laughed, but it sounded forced. You're bluffing. There's no way I could get past your security. No way I could hide a recording device. The woman's smile widened. You're right. A simple phone recording would never hold up. Too easy to dismiss. Too easy to claim it was edited or faked. Then what? Catherine started. So I used something better. Something embedded in the penthouse itself. In the speakers. In the security system. In the devices you all brought with you and left unlocked because you felt safe here. She paused. You know what's funny? None of you even noticed when your phone started syncing to a network you didn't recognize. Why would you? You're too important to worry about technical details. Adrian's hand moved instinctively to his own phone. A small icon he didn't recognize blinked in the corner of the screen. My name is Elena Ward, the woman said, and Adrian heard several people gasp. And 7 years ago, the people in this room stole everything from me. My company, my technology, my future. You erased me so completely that most of you don't even remember doing it. That's impossible, Jonathan said, but his voice wavered. Elena Ward is dead? Elena finished. That's what you told everyone, wasn't it? Tragic car accident. So sad. So convenient that all my patents and intellectual property transferred to your consortium. She laughed, and it was the coldest sound Adrian had ever heard. I wasn't dead. I was just invisible. Turns out, when you destroy someone's life completely, they stop showing up on your radar. They become the help, the service workers, the invisible people you don't bother to see. Catherine was backing toward the door. I'm calling security. Please do, Elena said. But you should know, they've been locked out of the building systems for the last 20 minutes. Same with the elevators, same with every exit. She checked her watch. And in approximately 3 minutes, every financial account connected to the people in this room will be frozen, pending federal investigation. You can't do that, Marcus said, but he'd gone pale. You can't just... I can't. But the Securities and Exchange Commission can. The FBI can. The IRS can. Especially when they receive comprehensive evidence of fraud, tax evasion, market manipulation, and about 40 other charges. Elena's voice was steady, clinical. Evidence I've been collecting for 7 years. Evidence you just spent 2 hours confirming and expanding on camera. Adrian's mind raced. He cataloged everything he'd heard tonight, everything that had been said. Most of it hadn't involved him directly. He'd barely participated in the conversations. But he'd been here, in the room, associated. His daughter's face flashed through his mind. This is insane, Veronica said, trying to sound authoritative but failing. You'll never make this stick. We have lawyers. We have... Money? Influence? Elena interrupted. I know. That's what makes this interesting. Because the system I built, the one you stole from me, it wasn't just a financial tool. It was a complete network integration platform. Every device, every account, every digital footprint. And I've spent 7 years building backdoors into every system you trust. She pulled out a tablet, tapped something on the screen. Around the room, phones started buzzing, simultaneously. Adrian looked down at his own screen and watched as his banking app opened on its own, displaying a message. Account access suspended pending review. Federal investigation in progress. No, someone whispered. No, no, no. It's spreading, Elena said calmly. Right now, every transaction you've made in the last decade is being analyzed. Every offshore account, every shell company, every payment you thought was hidden. She looked around the room, meeting each person's eyes. You were right about one thing tonight. The world does run on people who don't read the fine print. But I did. I read every line of every system you use, and I've been rewriting them. Marcus lunged toward her but stopped when she held up the tablet. I wouldn't, she said. This device is the only thing preventing your pension funds from being completely wiped. Attack me, and 3,000 retirees lose their life savings because of your fraud. Is that really how you want this to end? He froze. Adrian watched it all unfold with a strange sense of detachment. Part of him was calculating escape routes, legal strategies, ways to protect his assets and his daughter. But another part, a part he didn't usually acknowledge, felt something close to admiration. This woman had systematically dismantled the most powerful people in New York's financial district, in their own space, using their own arrogance against them. It was almost beautiful. Why? The question came from Jonathan, who'd slumped into a chair. Why go through all this? Why not just report us years ago? Elena's expression softened slightly, but not with kindness, with something darker. Because 7 years ago, I tried to report you. I went to the SEC, the FBI, the Justice Department. I had evidence then, too. Not as much, not as comprehensive, but enough. She paused. And nothing happened, because you had friends in the right places, because your lawyers were better than my lawyers, because the system protects people like you. So you became a waitress? Catherine's voice dripped with contempt even now, even in defeat. That's pathetic. I became invisible, Elena corrected. I became every person you've ever looked past or looked through, and from that position, I learned something important. People tell the truth when they think no one worth lying to is listening. You've been confessing your crimes to me for years, at parties, at restaurants, at charity events where you pat yourselves on the back for donating money you stole from someone else. The sound of sirens cut through the night, distant at first, then growing closer. They're here, Elena said. Federal agents. Real ones, not the ones you have in your pocket. They've been waiting for my signal. You'll go down too, Veronica said desperately. Whatever you did to our accounts, that's illegal. I'm already dead, remember? Elena smiled. Elena Ward died 7 years ago in a tragic accident. I'm just a ghost, and ghosts don't get prosecuted. Adrian's phone buzzed again. Another text from Maria. She's getting sleepy. Are you coming home? His daughter. His priority. His reason for everything. He stepped forward. Miss Ward, he said quietly, and Elena's gaze snapped to him. I need to know something. She waited. Did I steal from you? Directly? He kept his voice level. 7 years ago, was I part of what happened to your company? Elena studied him for a long moment. Around them, the others had started to panic properly, making calls that wouldn't connect, trying doors that wouldn't open, attempting to access accounts that no longer recognized them. No, she finally said. You weren't. You're here because of business you've done with these people, connections you've maintained. But the core crime? That wasn't you. Then I need to leave. I have a daughter waiting for me. You're not leaving, Marcus said, his voice sharp with panic. None of us are leaving. She said the building is locked. Elena looked at Adrian for another long moment, then tapped something on her tablet. The elevator on the north side just unlocked, she said. You have 5 minutes before the agents enter the building. Use them. Adrian didn't hesitate, didn't thank her, didn't look back at the people who'd been his associates, his network, his ladder to power. He just walked to the elevator and pressed the button. As the doors opened, he heard Catherine screaming at Elena, You can't do this! You can't destroy us! Elena's response was calm. I already did. The elevator doors closed, and Adrian descended into the chaos of sirens and flashing lights below. He exited through a side entrance, avoiding the federal vehicles pulling up to the main doors. His car was 3 blocks away. His daughter was 20 minutes away. Everything else could wait. By the time Adrian pulled into his driveway, his hands had stopped shaking. The adrenaline had faded, replaced by something heavier. The weight of realization, the understanding of how close he'd come to destruction. He'd built his fortune carefully, mostly legally. He'd never participated in the worst of what those people did, but he'd known. He'd stood in rooms where crimes were committed and said nothing. He'd benefited from connections to people whose wealth came from exploitation. And tonight that had almost cost him everything. Maria met him at the door, her expression concerned. She's still awake. Refused to sleep without you. Adrian managed a smile. Thank you. I'm sorry I'm late. Everything okay? You look... It's been a long night, he said. I'll explain tomorrow. Can you stay late? I'll pay double. Maria nodded, heading toward the guest room she used when she stayed over. Adrian climbed the stairs to his daughter's room. She was sitting up in bed, clutching her stuffed rabbit, her dark curls wild around her face. Daddy! She held out her arms. He scooped her up, breathing in the clean scent of her children's shampoo. "Hey, baby, I'm sorry I'm late. You promised you'd read to me." "I know. I know I did." He sat on the bed, settling her in his lap. "What do you want to hear?" She grabbed a book from her nightstand, something about a brave mouse who went on adventures. As Adrian read, his mind kept drifting back to the penthouse, to Elena Ward's expression as she watched everything crumble, to the panic in voices that always spoke with such confidence, to the understanding that power built on corruption was no power at all. His daughter's breathing slowed, deepened. She was asleep before he finished the third chapter. Adrian carried her to bed, tucked her in, kissed her forehead. In the hallway, he pulled out his phone and checked the news. "Federal raid on Manhattan penthouse," the headline read. "Multiple high-profile arrests expected in fraud investigation." He scrolled through the article, names he recognized, charges that didn't surprise him, and buried in the third paragraph, "Sources indicate the investigation was triggered by evidence provided by an anonymous informant with extensive knowledge of the defendant's financial activities." Adrian turned off his phone. In the morning, he'd contact his lawyers, review every business connection, begin the process of disentangling himself from anyone associated with tonight's disaster. It would be complicated, expensive. Some partnerships he'd thought were essential would have to end, but standing in his daughter's doorway, watching her sleep in the glow of her nightlight, he knew it was the right choice, the only choice. He'd spent years building wealth and power. Tonight, he'd learned the difference between building and stealing, between earning and taking, between control and destruction. Somewhere in the city, a woman he'd barely noticed had rewritten the rules of power, had taken the invisibility forced on her and turned it into the ultimate weapon. Adrian wondered what she'd do now, where she'd go. If she felt satisfied or empty or something in between, he'd never know. And that was probably for the best. But as he walked downstairs loosening his tie, he made himself a promise. His daughter would never have to stand in rooms like that penthouse, would never have to choose between conscience and profit, would never learn to look past people because they seemed unimportant. He'd make sure of it, even if it cost him everything he'd built. Outside, the sirens continued. The city kept moving. And in a penthouse 73 floors above the chaos, the powerful learned what it felt like to be powerless. For the first time in a long time, Adrian thought maybe the world was capable of balance after all. Maybe. The morning came too fast and brought news that spread through Manhattan's financial district like a plague. Adrian sat in his home office, coffee going cold in his hand, watching his phone light up with calls he wasn't answering. Every major news outlet was running the same story with slight variations in headline drama. Billion-dollar fraud ring exposed. Manhattan's elite face federal charges. The fall of the untouchables. His lawyer had called 6 times. His accountant, 4. Business partners he hadn't heard from in months suddenly needed urgent conversations. Adrian let them all go to voicemail. On the television across from his desk, a reporter stood outside the federal courthouse, voice sharp with the kind of excitement that came from a career-making story. Behind her, protesters had already gathered, people holding signs about wealth inequality and justice, their anger finally finding a target that couldn't simply buy its way out. "The question everyone's asking," the reporter was saying, "is how did federal investigators build such a comprehensive case so quickly? Sources within the FBI say they received what they're calling an unprecedented volume of evidence late last night, including audio recordings, financial documents, and communications that directly implicate the defendants in multiple federal crimes." Adrian's phone buzzed again. This time, he looked. A text from David Chen, his chief operating officer. "We need to talk. Now." He typed back, "My office. 1 hour." Then he turned off the television and sat in silence, thinking about everything he'd built and how much of it was about to come apart. The sound of small feet on hardwood made him look up. His daughter stood in the doorway, still in her pajamas, rabbit clutched under one arm. "You didn't say goodbye this morning," she said, her voice carrying that particular accusation only a 4-year-old could deliver. Adrian's chest tightened. "I'm sorry, sweetheart. I was up early. Didn't want to wake you." She padded across the room and climbed into his lap, a maneuver that was getting more difficult as she grew. "Maria says you have important work today." Maria's right. "Is it the same important work as last night?" Adrian looked at his daughter's face, so open and trusting, and felt the weight of every decision he'd ever made. Sort of. Sometimes grown-up work gets complicated. Like puzzles? Yeah, like really hard puzzles that don't always have good solutions. She seemed to consider this. Mrs. Thompson says when puzzles are too hard, you should ask for help. Mrs. Thompson sounds very wise. She teaches us at school. She's old but nice. His daughter shifted, getting comfortable. Are you scared of your puzzle? The question hit harder than it should have. Adrian thought about lying, the way adults do when they want to protect children from uncomfortable truths. But something about last night, about watching people who thought they were untouchable get touched, made him want to be honest. A little bit, he admitted. Sometimes the hardest part of puzzles is knowing which pieces to keep and which ones don't fit anymore. She nodded solemnly, as if this made perfect sense. Can I help? You already do, more than you know. Maria appeared in the doorway, apologetic. Sorry, I told her you were busy, but it's fine, Adrian said. We're just talking about puzzles. His daughter leaned against his chest, and Adrian held her there, acutely aware that moments like this, simple, clean, uncomplicated by the mess of adult choices, were the only things that actually mattered. Everything else was just scaffolding, structure that could be rebuilt if it collapsed. All right, kiddo, he said after a few more minutes. Maria's going to get you breakfast, and then it's time for school. Can we read tonight? The whole book this time? The whole book, Adrian promised, lifting her down. Every single page. She ran off with Maria, and the silence of the office felt heavier. Adrian turned his phone back on and started reading through the messages he'd been ignoring. Most were variations of panic, people wanting to know if he was implicated, if his assets were safe, if he knew anything about the investigation. One message stood out. From Thomas Wright, a business attorney he'd consulted exactly twice. Saw the news. If you were at that party last night, we should talk before federal investigators come asking questions. They will come. It's just a matter of when. Adrian saved the message and kept scrolling. Further down, he found something that made him stop. An unknown number. A message sent at 3:47 a.m. You have a chance most of them don't. Use it. No signature, no context. But Adrian knew who'd sent it. Elena Ward. The woman who'd destroyed 17 lives in a single evening was apparently keeping tabs on the one person she'd let walk away. The thought should have been threatening. Instead, it felt almost like permission. David Chen arrived exactly 1 hour later, looking like he'd slept in his suit. Probably had. David was Adrian's right hand in the company, the person who kept operations running while Adrian handled strategy and vision. They'd worked together for 6 years, and Adrian had never seen him this rattled. Tell me you weren't part of it, David said, dropping into the chair across from Adrian's desk. Tell me we're not about to watch everything collapse. I wasn't part of the fraud, Adrian said. Not directly. Not directly, that's not exactly comforting. I was at the party. I've done business with several of the people arrested. Federal investigators are probably going to want to talk to me. David's face went pale. Jesus Christ, Adrian, do you know what this means? Our investors are going to panic. Partners are going to pull out. Every deal we have in progress will probably fall apart. Yeah, I know. You know? That's it? You know? David stood up, started pacing. We've spent 6 years building this company, 6 years of 18-hour days and missed holidays and sacrificing everything to make this work. And you're telling me it's all going to implode because you attended the wrong party? Adrian let him vent. David had earned the right. He'd bet his career on Adrian's vision, and now that bet was looking dangerously unstable. I'm not saying we give up, Adrian said when David finally stopped pacing. I'm saying we adapt. We restructure. We cut ties with anyone associated with the investigation. That's half our major partnerships. Then we cut half our partnerships. David stared at him. You're serious. Completely. Adrian, without those partnerships, we lose access to capital markets. We lose our competitive advantage. We lose our connection to people who built their wealth on fraud, Adrian interrupted. Yes, we lose that, and maybe that's not the worst thing. David sat back down, rubbed his face with both hands. What happened last night? And don't tell me you just attended a party. Something changed. I can hear it in your voice. Adrian thought about Elena Ward standing in that penthouse, dismantling empires with quiet precision, about the terror in voices that had never known real fear. About his daughter asking if he was scared of his puzzle. I watched people who thought they were invincible learn they weren't, he said, and I realized I'd been building my career on proximity to that invincibility. Like if I stood close enough to power, some of it would protect me and my daughter. That's just smart business. Is it? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like I was one conversation away from federal prison, one overheard admission away from losing everything that actually matters. David was quiet for a long moment. So what do? We survive, but we do it clean. No more questionable partnerships. No more looking the other way when we hear things we shouldn't hear. No more telling ourselves that everyone operates this way, so it must be fine. That's going to cost us. Everything costs something, Adrian said. The question is what we're willing to pay. His phone rang. Unknown number. Adrian answered it, half expecting Elena Ward's voice. Instead, a crisp professional tone. Mr. Hale? This is Special Agent Rebecca Morrison with the FBI. I'd like to schedule a time to speak with you regarding an ongoing investigation. David's eyes went wide. Of course, Adrian said, keeping his voice steady. When would be convenient? Today, if possible. We're interviewing everyone who attended the gathering at your penthouse last night. It wasn't my penthouse. I was a guest. Yes, we're aware. Still, we'd like to speak with you. Shall we say 2 o'clock? You can come to our offices, or we can meet somewhere more private if you prefer. Adrian thought about federal agents showing up at his company headquarters. Thought about the optics, the message it would send. Your offices are fine. I'll be there. Excellent. Bring your attorney. The call ended. David looked like he might be sick. This is really happening. Call Thomas Wright, Adrian said. Tell him I need representation for an FBI interview at 2. Then start pulling together documentation of every business relationship we have. I want to know who we're connected to and how. That's going to take days. Then you better start now. David left, and Adrian sat alone with his thoughts and his cold coffee. His phone kept buzzing with messages he didn't want to read. Outside his window, the city moved through its morning routine, oblivious to the small disaster unfolding in his life. He thought about calling his father, a retired judge, who'd always been disappointed that Adrian chose business over law. Thought about the conversation they'd have, the inevitable "I told you so" wrapped in concern, decided against it. Some things you had to face alone. Instead, he opened his laptop and started searching for news about Elena Ward. Not the current story. Everyone was reporting on the arrests, the investigation, the spectacular fall of Manhattan's elite. He wanted the old story, the one from 7 years ago. It took 20 minutes of digging through archived articles, but he finally found it. A small piece in a tech industry publication, promising startup founder dies in tragic accident. The article was sparse on details. Elena Ward, 23, founder of CoreLink Technologies, killed in a single-car crash on the Pacific Coast Highway. Company assets to be distributed among investors. A terrible loss for the tech community. Thoughts and prayers. Adrian searched for more. Found a few blog posts from people who'd known her, expressing shock and grief. Found investment documents showing CoreLink had been valued at just under $200 million before her death. Found a transfer agreement dated 1 week after the accident, signing over all patents and intellectual property to a consortium of investors, the same investors who'd been arrested last night. He pulled up photos from CoreLink's early days. There she was, Elena Ward at 23, standing in front of a whiteboard covered in code and diagrams, dark hair shorter than it was now, eyes bright with the kind of optimism that came from believing hard work and innovation actually mattered. What had they done to her? What exactly had happened that made faking her own death seem like the better option? Adrian would probably never know the full story. But he knew enough. Knew that the people he'd spent years courting and impressing had destroyed a 23-year-old woman's life because her technology was worth stealing. Knew they'd gotten away with it because the system was built to protect people like them. Until it wasn't. His phone buzzed again. Thomas Wright. Got your message. I'll meet you at the FBI office at 1:45. Don't talk to anyone about this before then, and I mean anyone. Adrian typed back. Understood. He had 4 hours before the interview. 4 hours to prepare for questions he couldn't anticipate about a situation he barely understood. He should spend the time reviewing his calendar from 7 years ago, documenting every interaction with the people arrested, building a timeline that proved his distance from their crimes. Instead, he found himself reading more about Elena Ward, about CoreLink Technologies and what it had promised to do, about a young woman who'd built something extraordinary and had it ripped away by people who saw her as nothing more than a resource to exploit. By the time Maria brought his daughter home from school, Adrian had assembled a picture of who Elena Ward had been. Brilliant, driven, naive enough to believe contracts and patents would protect her, young enough to think the system worked. 7 years was a long time to plan revenge, a long time to learn every system, exploit every weakness, position every piece. Most people would have moved on, found another path, built something new somewhere else. Elena Ward had chosen to become invisible instead, to watch and wait and prepare for a single perfect moment of destruction. Adrian couldn't decide if that was admirable or terrifying, probably both. "Daddy!" His daughter burst into his office, backpack bouncing. "I made you something at school." She thrust a piece of construction paper at him, a drawing of what appeared to be 2 stick figures, one tall and one small, holding hands. Hearts floating around them. "It's us," she explained. "Mrs. Thompson said we should draw our families." Adrian's throat tightened. "It's perfect. Thank you. Can we hang it up?" "Absolutely." He stood carrying the drawing to the wall behind his desk where a few other pieces of her artwork were already displayed. "Right here, where I can see it while I work." She beamed at him, and Adrian felt the familiar ache of loving someone more than he'd ever thought possible. This was why he'd attended those parties, made those connections, stood in rooms with people he didn't respect, to build security for her, to make sure she never had to struggle or compromise or choose between principles and survival. Except he'd been doing it wrong, building a foundation on sand and calling it stone. "Maria says you have to go to a meeting this afternoon," his daughter said. "That's right." "Is it for your puzzle?" Adrian smiled despite everything. "Yeah, it's part of solving the puzzle." "Will you fix it?" "I'm going to try." She seemed satisfied with this answer and ran off to find Maria. Adrian checked the time. 90 minutes until he needed to leave for the FBI office. He spent 60 of those minutes working through emails and documents with David, building a defense that felt flimsy, even as they constructed it. Yes, he'd attended the party. No, he hadn't participated in the conversations about illegal activity. Yes, he had business relationships with several of the defendants. No, those relationships didn't involve criminal conduct. It all sounded weak, circumstantial, like exactly what someone would say if they were trying to distance themselves from guilt. The truth was more complicated. He hadn't committed crimes, but he'd benefited from systems built by people who did. He'd accepted their money, used their connections, looked the other way when things seemed questionable because questioning them would have been inconvenient. That might not be illegal, but it wasn't innocent either. Thomas Wright met him in the parking garage of the FBI field office, looking exactly like what he was, an expensive lawyer who specialized in keeping wealthy people out of prison. "Before we go in," Thomas said, "I need you to understand something. Federal investigators are very good at making innocent people incriminate themselves. They'll be friendly, conversational. They'll make you think you're just clearing up misunderstandings. Don't fall for it. I wasn't involved in the fraud. That's what you think. But involvement is a flexible concept. Did you benefit from relationships with the defendants? Did you have knowledge of illegal activity? Did you fail to report crimes you witnessed?" Thomas fixed him with a hard stare. "See how quickly I wasn't involved becomes complicated?" Adrian's stomach turned. "So what do I say?" "As little as possible, answer the questions asked. Don't elaborate. Don't try to explain or justify. And if anything makes you uncomfortable, we stop and confer privately." They walked into the building together, through security, up an elevator to the 4th floor. A young agent met them in the waiting area and led them to a small conference room, 2 chairs on one side of a table, 2 on the other. Special Agent Rebecca Morrison was younger than Adrian expected, maybe early 40s, with sharp eyes and the kind of calm competence that came from years of interrogating people who thought they were smarter than her. "Mr. Hale, thank you for coming in," she said, shaking his hand. "I'm Special Agent Morrison. This is my partner, Agent Chen." Agent Chen nodded, but didn't offer his hand, just pulled out a tablet and started typing. "Before we begin," Morrison said, "I want to be clear that you're not under arrest. You're free to leave at any time. This is a voluntary interview." Thomas spoke up. My client understands he's here to cooperate fully with your investigation. Morrison smiled slightly. Good. That's what we like to hear. She opened a folder, glanced at something inside. Mr. Hale, you attended a gathering last night at a penthouse in Manhattan. Is that correct? Yes. Can you tell me why you were there? Adrian glanced at Thomas, who gave a small nod. It was a networking event. Several business associates were in attendance. Business associates. Can you name them? He did. Watching Morrison's face remained carefully neutral as he listed people who were probably being interviewed in other rooms of this same building. And what was discussed at this gathering? General business topics, industry trends, some personal conversation? Nothing specific? This was the trap. If he said nothing specific, he looked like he was hiding something. If he admitted to hearing criminal confessions, he became a witness who'd failed to report crimes. Thomas cleared his throat. Could you be more specific about what you're asking, Agent Morrison? She smiled again, sharper this time. I'm asking if Mr. Hale overheard any conversations about illegal activity, financial fraud, tax evasion, market manipulation, that sort of thing. I overheard many conversations, Adrian said carefully, some of which included inappropriate jokes and questionable claims. I didn't take them seriously at the time. Inappropriate jokes, Morrison repeated, making a note. About what specifically? About wealth, power, the ability to avoid consequences. Adrian could feel Thomas's tension beside him. I assumed it was the kind of exaggeration successful people engage in. I didn't think anyone was making actual confessions. But they were making confessions. We have recordings. I'm aware of that now. Morrison leaned forward slightly. Mr. Hale, I'm going to be direct with you. We know you weren't part of the core conspiracy. We know you didn't participate in the fraud that took place 7 years ago. But we also know you've done business with every single person arrested last night. So I need to understand, are you a witness or are you complicit? The question hung in the air. Thomas started to object, but Adrian held up a hand. I was a witness, an uncomfortable, complicit witness who should have asked harder questions and made better choices about my associations. But I didn't commit crimes, and I didn't knowingly benefit from others' crimes. Morrison studied him for a long moment. Your company has received investment from several of the defendants. Yes. That investment is currently frozen pending investigation. I assumed it would be. How does that affect your business operations? Adrian thought about David's panic that morning, about deals falling apart and partners disappearing. Significantly, but we'll manage. By finding new investors, by restructuring, cutting costs, focusing on sustainable growth rather than rapid expansion. Morrison made another note. Agent Chen, who'd been silent this whole time, spoke up. Mr. Hale, did you know Elena Ward? The name landed like a punch. No, Adrian said. I never met her before last night. But you knew who she was. I knew the name. Knew about CoreLink Technologies and what happened 7 years ago. What do you think happened 7 years ago? This was dangerous territory. Accusing the defendants of crimes they hadn't been charged with yet could complicate everything. I think, Adrian said slowly, that a young woman built something valuable and lost it in circumstances that now appear suspicious. Appear suspicious, Chen repeated. That's diplomatic. It's accurate. I don't know what happened. I only know what I've read and what I observed last night. Morrison took over again. What did you observe last night? Adrian described the evening in careful detail. The gathering, the conversations, the wine spill, Elena's revelation, the panic that followed. He left out his own escape, uncertain if admitting that Morrison had let him leave early would help or hurt. And you left before federal agents arrived, Morrison said, making it a statement rather than a question. Yes. Why? Because someone who wasn't under arrest told me I could, and because my 4-year-old daughter was waiting for me at home. Morrison's expression softened fractionally. You're a single parent, is that right? Yes, her mother died during childbirth. That must be difficult. Adrian didn't respond. He'd learned years ago that people's sympathy for single fathers was performative. They didn't actually want to hear about the difficulty. They just wanted to acknowledge it existed. Morrison closed her folder. Mr. Hale, here's my assessment. You're not who we're after. You attended a party, heard some things, made some poor choices about business partnerships. But you're not a criminal, and I don't think you're trying to protect criminals." Thomas visibly relaxed. "However," Morrison continued, "your cooperation could be valuable. We need witnesses who can testify about what was said at that gathering, people who can corroborate the recordings we have." "My client would be happy to cooperate," Thomas said quickly. "In exchange for immunity," Morrison added, "full immunity from any potential charges related to associations with the defendants." Adrian looked at Thomas, who nodded. "That's acceptable. Then we'll draw up the paperwork. In the meantime, Mr. Hale, I need you to be available for additional interviews, and I need you to maintain distance from anyone associated with the investigation." "Already planned on it." Morrison stood, extending her hand. "Thank you for your time. We'll be in touch." Outside the building, Thomas let out a long breath. "That went better than I expected." "Is immunity actually worth anything?" Adrian asked. "In this case?" "Yes. It means they genuinely don't see you as a target. They want your testimony, not your head on a spike." Thomas checked his phone. "I'll work with their office to finalize the agreement. Shouldn't take more than a few days." They parted ways in the parking garage, and Adrian sat in his car for several minutes before starting the engine. His hands were shaking slightly. Adrenaline, probably. Or relief. Or the delayed reaction to how close he'd come to disaster. His phone buzzed. "David." "How did it go?" Adrian typed back. "Better than expected. They want me as a witness, offering immunity." "Thank Christ. But we still need to restructure everything. No more questionable partnerships." "I'm already working on it. It's going to hurt." "Let it hurt." Adrian drove home through late afternoon traffic, his mind cycling through everything that had happened in the last 24 hours. Yesterday morning, he'd been a successful entrepreneur with a growing company and powerful connections. Today, he was a federal witness watching his professional network implode. The strange thing was, he didn't feel as devastated as he should. Scared, yes. Uncertain about the future, absolutely. But there was something almost clean about it, like a wound that had finally been opened and could now properly heal. Maria met him at the door, concerned. "Everything okay?" "Yeah, complicated, but okay." He looked past her into the house. "Where's my daughter?" "Living room, watching her show." Adrian found her curled up on the couch, absorbed in something animated and cheerful. He sat beside her, and she immediately climbed into his lap without taking her eyes off the screen. "How was your puzzle meeting?" she asked. "Productive. I think we're getting closer to solving it." "Good." She leaned against him, warm and solid and utterly trusting. Adrian held her and watched the cartoon and tried not to think about all the ways this could still fall apart. The immunity agreement could fail. The restructuring could bankrupt his company. Partners could sue. Investors could revolt. Or everything could work out. The investigation could proceed without further implicating him. The company could survive on a smaller, cleaner foundation. His daughter could grow up watching her father rebuild rather than collapse. He didn't know which future was waiting, but for the first time in years, he felt like he was moving towards something real rather than running from something he couldn't name. That night, after dinner and bath time and the promised reading of the entire book, Adrian tucked his daughter into bed and returned to his office. His laptop was still open to the articles about Elena Ward, her face frozen in a moment of optimism that hadn't survived. He closed the browser and opened a new document, started writing down everything he remembered from the party, every conversation, every admission, every detail that might help federal prosecutors build their case. It took 3 hours. When he finished, the document was 12 pages long and potentially devastating to people who'd once been his pathway to success. Adrian saved it, encrypted it, and sent it to Thomas Wright with instructions to forward it to Special Agent Morrison. Then he poured himself a drink, actually drank it this time, and stood at his office window looking out at the city. Somewhere out there, Elena Ward was probably doing the same thing. Standing in some anonymous apartment, looking at the same skyline, processing the aftermath of 7 years of planning. Adrian wondered if she felt satisfied. If destroying the people who'd destroyed her had been worth the time and effort. If revenge delivered what it promised. He'd probably never know. Their paths had crossed for one night, in one room, during one spectacular implosion. That was likely the only intersection their lives would ever have. But he was grateful for it. Grateful that she'd given him a chance to step back from the edge he hadn't fully realized he was walking. grateful that his daughter would never have to visit him in prison or learn that her father had sacrificed integrity for influence. His phone buzzed one last time. That same unknown number. Another message. The hard part starts now. Don't waste it. Adrian stared at the message for a long moment, then deleted it and blocked the number. He didn't need Elena Ward's guidance, didn't need her approval or her warnings. He just needed to do what he should have been doing all along, building something worth keeping, in a way worth defending. The next morning would bring new challenges. Angry phone calls, difficult conversations, the slow, painful work of disentangling himself from relationships that had seemed essential yesterday and toxic today. But tonight, standing in his office with an empty glass and a clear conscience, Adrian felt something he hadn't felt in years. He felt ready. 3 weeks passed before the cracks really started to show. Adrian had prepared himself for the collapse, expected it, even. But preparation didn't make it hurt less when partners started pulling their investments, when contracts got quietly canceled, when people who'd returned his calls within minutes suddenly became unreachable for days. David walked into his office on a Tuesday morning carrying a folder that looked too thin to contain good news. Meridian pulled out, he said without preamble. Effective immediately. They're invoking the morality clause. Adrian looked up from the spreadsheet he'd been staring at for the last hour. The morality clause. That's rich, coming from them. Doesn't matter if it's hypocritical, it's legal. David dropped the folder on the desk. That's 3 major investors in 2 weeks. We're running out of runway. How long do we have? The current burn rate? Maybe 4 months. Less if anyone else jumps ship. Adrian leaned back in his chair, rubbing his eyes. 4 months. Not nearly enough time to secure new funding, not with his name attached to the scandal even peripherally. What about the Singapore deal? Dead. They sent a very polite email about concerns regarding current circumstances. David's voice was flat, exhausted. We're toxic right now, Adrian. Every business reporter in the country has written about your connection to the arrests. It doesn't matter that you're cooperating with federal investigators. People see the association and run. So we downsize. We've already downsized twice. We're operating with skeleton staff. David sat down heavily. I'm not sure there's anything left to cut without gutting the actual business. Adrian's phone buzzed. Another news alert. The trial date had been set. 6 months from now. 6 months of constant media coverage, of his name appearing in articles about fraud and corruption, of explaining to his daughter why people were saying bad things about Daddy's friends. Except they weren't his friends. He'd known that intellectually, but the last 3 weeks had made it visceral. Not a single person from that party had reached out to him. No calls asking how he was holding up, no messages of solidarity or support, just silence, and then lawyers sending letters about dissolved partnerships. I need to tell you something, David said quietly, and you're not going to like it. Adrian looked at him. What? I got a job offer from Techstone. It's good. Really good. More than I'm making here, plus equity that's actually worth something. The words landed like a physical blow. David had been with him from the beginning, had believed in the vision when it was just PowerPoint slides and optimism, had worked 100-hour weeks and sacrificed relationships and bet everything on this company. When do you start? Adrian asked, keeping his voice level. I haven't accepted yet. I wanted to talk to you first. There's nothing to talk about. It's a good opportunity. You should take it. David's face twisted. Don't do that. Don't make this easy. What do you want me to say? That you're abandoning ship? That you're being disloyal? Adrian shook his head. You've got a family, David. Kids who need college funds. A mortgage. You can't go down with this company just because I'm too stubborn to abandon it. It's not about stubborn. It's about stupid. David's frustration finally broke through. We could save this. We could rebrand, bring in a new CEO, distance you from operations. But you won't do it. You're insisting on staying visible, on maintaining control, on being the face of a company that everyone associates with criminals. Because running away won't fix anything. It'll just prove that I was guilty and trying to hide. Who cares what it proves? You have immunity. The FBI cleared you. But you're so focused on some moral principle that you're willing to destroy everything we built. Adrian stood up, walked to the window. The city stretched out below, indifferent to his problems. I have a daughter, he said quietly, and someday she's going to be old enough to Google my name. to read articles about this, to ask questions about what happened and why. He turned back to David. I can't control what other people write or think, but I can control whether I ran or stood, whether I tried to hide my associations or acknowledged them and moved forward differently. That's very noble. It's also financially suicidal. Maybe, but it's the only choice I can live with. David was quiet for a long moment. I'm taking the job, he finally said. I'm sorry, I really am, but I can't watch this slow-motion crash anymore. I understand. When's your last day? 2 weeks. I'll help transition everything, make sure whoever replaces me has what they need. There might not be anyone to replace you. We might not make it 2 more months. Then I'll help you shut it down properly. David stood. For what it's worth, I think you're making a mistake, but I also think you're making it for the right reasons, which somehow makes it worse. After David left, Adrian sat alone in his office and let himself feel the full weight of it. His company was dying. His professional reputation was shredded. His network had evaporated, and now his most trusted colleague was leaving. He should have been panicking, should have been on the phone begging investors for another chance, compromising his principles for survival, doing whatever it took to keep the doors open. Instead, he found himself thinking about Elena Ward, about 7 years of invisibility and planning, 7 years of watching the people who destroyed her continue to prosper while she served them champagne and listened to their confessions. 3 weeks of professional collapse seemed trivial in comparison. His phone rang. Special Agent Morrison. Mr. Hale, we need you to come in again. There's been a development. Adrian's stomach dropped. What kind of development? The kind we should discuss in person. Can you be here in an hour? I'll be there. Thomas Wright met him in the same parking garage, looking more stressed than last time. Do you know what this is about? No idea. She just said there was a development. That's never good. Developments mean complications. Thomas checked his watch. Whatever they ask, remember, you have immunity. They can't use anything against you, but that doesn't mean you should volunteer information. They went through the same security, took the same elevator, ended up in the same conference room. But this time, Morrison wasn't alone. A man in an expensive suit sat beside her, and Adrian recognized him from news coverage. James Reardon, Assistant U.S. Attorney. This was definitely not good. Mr. Hale, thank you for coming on short notice, Morrison said. You know my colleague, Agent Chen. This is Assistant U.S. Attorney Reardon. He's leading the prosecution. Reardon didn't smile. Mr. Hale, we have a problem, and we're hoping you can help us solve it. Thomas leaned forward. What kind of problem? The recordings we received from our confidential informant, they're remarkably comprehensive, almost too comprehensive. Reardon opened a tablet, turned it so Adrian could see. They captured conversations from every corner of that penthouse, including private discussions in rooms where the serving staff shouldn't have had access. Adrian said nothing, waiting. We've been analyzing the audio, trying to establish chain of custody, verify authenticity, and we've discovered something interesting. Reardon tapped the screen. There are gaps, specific moments where the recording cuts out, then resumes, always during conversations involving you. I don't understand, Adrian said, though he was starting to. Morrison took over. Someone edited the recordings before turning them over to us, removed portions of conversations. We don't know what was said during those gaps, but we know they exist. And you think my client knows why? Thomas's voice had an edge. We think someone protected your client, Reardon said, and we need to know why. Because if there's exculpatory evidence that's been suppressed, or if your client had involvement that our informant is concealing that compromises our entire case. Adrian's mind raced. Elena had edited the recordings, had deliberately removed portions that might have implicated him or made his position more complicated. Why? I don't know anything about edited recordings, he said carefully. I attended the party. I heard conversations. I gave you a complete account of what I witnessed. Did you speak with our informant that night? Morrison asked. Beyond basic service interactions? Adrian thought about Elena letting him leave, about the elevator unlocking, about the text message. You have a chance, most of them don't. Briefly, he admitted, after the confrontation, she told me I could leave. What exactly did she say? That I hadn't been part of the original crime, that I had a few minutes before federal agents arrived, that I should use them. Reardon and Morrison exchanged looks. "And you didn't think to mention this in your previous interview?" Reardon's tone was sharp. Thomas cut in. "My client answered the questions asked. No one inquired about conversations with the informant." "We're inquiring now," Morrison said. "Mr. Hale, did Elena Ward give you any indication why she was protecting you?" The name hung in the air. They'd confirmed it was Elena. Not that Adrian had doubted, but hearing it officially made it real. "No, I assumed it was because I genuinely wasn't involved in what happened 7 years ago." "But you were there that night," Reardon pressed. "You have connections to every single defendant. You've benefited financially from relationships with people who committed fraud. And our star witness decides to edit you out of the evidence? That creates reasonable doubt." Adrian felt cold. "Are you saying I'm a suspect now?" "We're saying we need to understand the full scope of your relationship with Elena Ward." "There is no relationship. I'd never met her before that night." "Then why would she protect you?" Morrison's voice was softer, almost sympathetic. "Mr. Hale, we're not trying to trap you. We're trying to understand. Because right now, defense attorneys are going to argue that our evidence has been tampered with, that our informant selectively edited recordings to protect someone, which calls into question everything she provided." Adrian saw the trap closing. If he admitted that Elena had reasons to trust him, he'd have to explain what those reasons were. If he claimed ignorance, he looked complicit in a cover-up. Either way, his immunity agreement might not protect him from perjury charges if they thought he was lying. "I can only speculate," he said finally, "but if I had to guess, she was at that party to destroy the people who destroyed her. I wasn't one of those people. Maybe she saw a difference between active participation and passive association." "That's a fine line," Reardon said. "It's the only line that matters." Morrison studied him for a long moment. "Mr. Hale, we're going to need you to testify about this, about your conversation with Elena Ward, about why she might have edited the recordings." "I've already agreed to testify." "This is different. This makes you a material witness to potential evidence tampering. Defense is going to tear into you. They're going to suggest you and Elena Ward conspired to frame their clients." Adrian laughed, couldn't help it. "That's insane. I didn't even know who she was until she revealed herself." "Can you prove that?" Reardon asked. The question silenced him. Could he prove he'd never met Elena Ward before that night? That they hadn't been in contact, hadn't planned anything together? He had no alibi, no documentation. Just his word against inevitable insinuations from defense attorneys trying to create reasonable doubt. Thomas spoke up. "Unless you're charging my client with something, I think we're done here. He's answered your questions. He's cooperating fully. If you need testimony about his observations, he'll provide it. But these fishing expeditions need to stop." Morrison held up a hand. "Mr. Wright, I understand your frustration, but we need Mr. Hale to understand the position he's in. The defense is going to paint him as either a co-conspirator or a beneficiary of selective prosecution. His testimony needs to withstand that scrutiny." "Then prepare him properly," Thomas said. "Give him the questions you expect. Let him review the relevant evidence. But don't ambush him with implications that he's somehow connected to evidence tampering." Reardon closed his tablet. "Fair enough. We'll send over the relevant portions of the recordings, the ones that remain. Mr. Hale should review them carefully. Be prepared to explain any conversations he participated in or overheard." "He will be." They were dismissed. In the elevator, Thomas was silent until the doors closed. "That was worse than I expected. They think I'm involved somehow. They think Elena Ward's protection of you creates a problem for their case, which it does." Thomas rubbed his face. "Adrian, I need you to be completely honest with me. Is there any connection between you and Elena Ward? Anything at all that could surface and blindside us?" "No, I swear. I'd never heard her name before that night." "But she knew you well enough to edit you out of evidence. Maybe she just did her homework, researched everyone who'd be at the party, knew I wasn't part of the original conspiracy." "That's a lot of effort for a stranger." Adrian didn't have a response to that. Because Thomas was right. It was a lot of effort. Elena had spent 7 years planning her revenge. She wouldn't have arbitrarily protected someone without reason. But what was the reason? What had she seen in him that warranted protection? He spent the rest of the day reviewing his calendar from 7 years ago, searching for any connection he might have forgotten. Any meeting, any email, any remote possibility that he'd crossed paths with Elena Ward before her supposed death. Nothing. By the time he got home, His head ached and his eyes burned from staring at screens. Maria met him at the door with concern written across her face. "She's upset," Maria said quietly. "Some kids at school said things. About you. About the news." Adrian's heart sank. "What kind of things?" "That you're a criminal, that you're going to jail. Kids are cruel. They hear their parents talking and they repeat it without understanding." He found his daughter in her room, not crying but close to it, clutching her rabbit and staring at the wall. "Hey, sweetheart." He sat on her bed. "Maria said you had a tough day." She didn't look at him. "Emma said her mom said you're a bad man, that you steal money." Adrian felt something crack in his chest. Emma's mom is wrong, but she said it's on the news, that everyone knows. The news is complicated. Sometimes they get things wrong. Sometimes they tell part of a story without explaining all of it. "Are you going to jail?" Her voice was so small. "No, I promise I didn't do anything wrong." "Then why is everyone saying you did? How did you explain guilt by association to a 4-year-old? How did you make her understand that the world was complicated and unfair and sometimes doing the right thing still led to punishment?" "Because I was friends with some people who did bad things," he said carefully. "And even though I didn't do those bad things, people think I might have because I was friends with them. That's not fair. No, it's not." "So what are you going to do?" Adrian pulled her close. "I'm going to tell the truth. And I'm going to make sure people understand what really happened. And I'm going to keep being your dad and taking care of you, no matter what anyone says." She was quiet for a moment. "Will Emma still be mean to me?" "Maybe. Some people are mean when they're scared or confused, but that's not your fault. And it doesn't mean what they're saying is true." "I don't like it." "I don't either. But we're going to get through it together, okay?" She nodded against his chest, and Adrian held her and wondered how Elena Ward had survived 7 years of this. 7 years of being invisible, of hearing people say terrible things, of watching the guilty prosper while she served them drinks. His daughter fell asleep in his arms. He carried her to bed, tucked her in, stood in her doorway longer than necessary, just watching her breathe. Downstairs, his laptop was still open to the calendar from 7 years ago. Adrian closed it without looking. Whatever connection Elena thought existed between them, it didn't matter. What mattered was getting through the trial, clearing his name, and rebuilding a life that his daughter could be proud of. His phone buzzed. An email from Morrison. "Attached are the relevant audio files. Review carefully. We'll need to meet again next week to prepare testimony." Adrian downloaded the files but didn't listen to them. Not tonight. Tonight, he needed to pretend that everything was normal, that his world wasn't fragmenting, that his daughter's innocence wasn't being shattered by things she didn't understand and shouldn't have to carry. But pretending only lasted until morning. The news broke at 6 a.m. New questions in Manhattan. Fraud case. Did star witness tamper with evidence? Adrian's phone exploded with calls and messages. Thomas, David, reporters he'd never heard of, business partners demanding explanations. His father leaving a voicemail that started with, "I told you this would happen," and ended with, "Call me immediately." He ignored all of it and made his daughter breakfast. Scrambled eggs and toast, orange juice, normalcy performed through gritted teeth. "Are you okay, Daddy?" She watched him with those big, too perceptive eyes. "Just tired, sweetheart. Didn't sleep well." "Because of the bad people saying things?" "Yeah, because of that." "You should tell them to stop." If only it were that simple. "I'm working on it." She seemed satisfied with this answer and returned to her eggs. Adrian's phone kept buzzing. He turned it off completely and focused on his daughter, on getting her ready for school, on maintaining the illusion that everything was fine. But when he dropped her off, he saw other parents watching him, whispering. One mother actually pulled her child away when his daughter tried to say hello. Adrian wanted to scream, wanted to grab these people and shake them and demand they understand that proximity wasn't guilt, that association wasn't crime, that his 4-year-old daughter didn't deserve to be punished for his mistakes. Instead, he walked back to his car and sat there for 10 minutes with his hands shaking on the steering wheel. His phone, powered back on, showed 37 missed calls. He scrolled through them, found one that surprised him. Veronica Chen. He called her back, half expecting it to go to voicemail. She answered on the second ring. "Adrian, thank you for calling back." "I'm surprised you called at all. Thought you'd be too busy dealing with your own legal problems." "I am. But I saw the news this morning and I realized something. Her voice was different, quieter, less sharp. We were all in that room together. We all heard the same things. But you're the only one who walked away clean, and now they're trying to drag you back in. Why do you care? Because it's not right. Look, I did what they're accusing me of. We all did. The fraud, the tax evasion, all of it. We earned our arrests. She paused. But you didn't. You were just guilty of not asking enough questions. And watching them destroy you for that, it's wrong. Adrian didn't know what to say. I'm going to testify, Veronica continued, at the trial. I'm going to tell them you weren't part of it, that you attended parties and did business but never participated in the actual crimes. It won't fix everything, but it might help. Why would you do that? It doesn't benefit you. No, but I have kids too, and I keep thinking about them reading about me someday, about what I did and who I became. Her voice cracked slightly. I can't undo my choices, but I can at least tell the truth about yours. The call ended, and Adrian sat in his car staring at his phone in disbelief. Veronica Chen, ruthless, ambitious, morally flexible Veronica Chen, was going to testify on his behalf. Maybe the world was capable of surprises after all. He drove to his office, which felt emptier every day. Half the desks were vacant now. The receptionist he'd had to let go. The whole floor had the hollow feeling of a place slowly dying. David was at his desk, packing boxes. You're leaving early, Adrian said. Techstone wants me to start Monday. I figured it was better to rip the Band-Aid off. Yeah, probably right. David taped up a box, set it aside. I saw the news this morning about the evidence tampering questions. It's a mess. It's more than a mess. It's a systematic attempt to discredit the prosecution's entire case. David looked at him. Which means whoever Elena Ward is, she made powerful enemies very angry. We all did, by association. No, you did by being there. The rest of us made enemies by building businesses on top of their fraud. David's expression was serious. Adrian, has it occurred to you that you might be in actual danger? Not legal danger, physical danger. Adrian hadn't considered that. You think someone would... I think desperate billionaires facing prison time are capable of anything. And you're a loose end, a witness who can corroborate recordings. If something happened to you, the prosecution's case gets weaker. That's paranoid. It's realistic. These people destroyed Elena Ward's entire life for a technology platform. You think they'd hesitate to eliminate a witness? Adrian's mouth went dry. I have immunity. I'm cooperating. Killing me would just make things worse for them. Only if they get caught. And people like that, they're very good at not getting caught. David picked up another box. I'm not saying this to scare you. I'm saying it because I still give a damn, and I think you should be careful. Watch your back. Maybe hire security. I can't afford security. I can barely afford rent at this point. Then be smart. Don't go places alone. Don't follow predictable routines. And for the love of everything, don't trust anyone associated with that night. After David left, taking 6 years of partnership with him, Adrian sat alone in his office and let the weight of it all settle. His company was collapsing. His reputation was destroyed. His daughter was being ostracized at school. And now there was the possibility that someone might actually try to hurt him to protect themselves. 7 years. Elena Ward had endured 7 years of this, and worse. Had survived and planned and executed perfect revenge against people who'd thought her broken. Adrian didn't feel broken, but he felt close. His phone rang. Morrison again. Mr. Hale, have you reviewed the audio files? Not yet. You need to, as soon as possible, because we just received notification that 3 of the defendants are filing motions to dismiss based on evidence tampering. They're arguing that if our informant selectively edited recordings, we can't prove what was actually said. Can they do that? They can try. And they might succeed if we can't demonstrate the chain of custody and verify that the recordings accurately represent what occurred. Morrison sounded exhausted. Which means we need your testimony more than ever. You were there. You heard the conversations. You can corroborate what the recordings show. What if I can't remember everything perfectly? It was 3 weeks ago, and I wasn't paying attention to half of what was said. Then you testify to what you do remember, but Adrian, she used his first name, which felt significant. You need to be prepared for this to get ugly. Defense attorneys are going to suggest you and Elena Ward conspired. They're going to imply you had motivations we don't know about. They're going to try to make you look like either a liar or a co-conspirator. So basically, I'm fucked either way. Basically, yeah. Unless we can find Elena Ward and get her to explain why she edited the recordings. But she's completely disappeared. No trace. It's like she never existed. Of course she'd disappeared. Elena Ward had been invisible for 7 years. She knew how to vanish. I'll review the recordings, Adrian said, and I'll testify. But I need you to understand something. I don't have all the answers you want. I can't explain Elena's motivations. I can only tell you what I saw and heard. That'll have to be enough. After Morrison hung up, Adrian finally opened the audio files, put in his headphones, and pressed play. The first file was Jonathan Westbrook's story about the Indonesian environmental violations. Adrian heard his own voice briefly. Sounds fascinating. Flat, disinterested. Then silence where his voice should have been again as the conversation continued. Elena had cut him out. Every response, every moment he'd spoken, carefully removed. The second file was worse. A conversation about offshore accounts that Adrian had been part of, asking questions about tax implications. His questions were gone. Only the responses remained, making it sound like a monologue rather than a dialogue. File after file, the pattern continued. Elena had systematically erased his presence while preserving everything around him. It should have felt like a gift. She'd protected him, given him plausible deniability. Instead, it felt like a burden. Because now he had to explain why. Had to defend her choice to prosecutors who saw it as evidence tampering and defense attorneys who'd use it to create reasonable doubt. He listened to all 43 files. By the end, his head throbbed and his coffee had gone cold. The recordings were devastating, clear confessions of fraud, tax evasion, market manipulation. Enough to convict everyone in that room multiple times over, everyone except him. Because Elena Ward had decided he deserved a chance. Adrian closed his laptop and sat in the empty office as afternoon light slanted through the windows. Outside, the city continued its relentless forward motion, indifferent to individual disasters. He thought about his daughter asking what he was going to do, about David warning him to watch his back, about Veronica Chen offering to testify on his behalf despite her own legal jeopardy. Most of all, he thought about Elena Ward, somewhere out there, watching the chaos she'd created and probably not feeling satisfied at all. Because revenge didn't fill empty spaces. It just created new ones. His phone buzzed one more time. Another unknown number. Against his better judgment, he answered. Adrian Hale? A woman's voice, not Elena. Yes, my name is Sarah Mitchell. I'm a journalist with the Financial Chronicle. I'm working on a profile of Elena Ward, who she was, what happened to her, why she did what she did. I was hoping you might agree to an interview. No comment. Mr. Hale, please. I'm not trying to write a hit piece. I'm trying to understand her story. And you're one of the few people she chose to protect. That means something. It means I wasn't part of the original crime, that's all. I think it means more than that. I've been researching CoreLink technologies, looking into what really happened 7 years ago. And I found something interesting. Adrian's grip on the phone tightened. What? A patent filing. From 8 years ago. CoreLink's core technology, the network integration platform. It listed 3 inventors, Elena Ward, Marcus Reinhardt, and Adrian Hale. The world tilted. That's impossible, Adrian said. I never worked with CoreLink. According to the patent office, you did. Your name is on the original filing. But when the technology was transferred after Elena's supposed death, your name was removed from all subsequent documentation. Adrian's mind raced backward. 8 years ago. He'd been fresh out of MIT, consulting for tech startups, doing contract work while building his own company. He'd worked on dozens of projects. But CoreLink, Elena Ward? And then he remembered. A 3-month contract, a network security project, working with a startup that was building something ambitious and complicated. He'd contributed some code, solved some problems, moved on to the next project. He'd been credited on a patent? Mr. Hale? Sarah's voice pulled him back. Are you still there? I need to go. Wait, can we meet? Talk about this? Because if you were one of the original inventors, that changes everything. That means when they stole CoreLink's technology, they stole from you too. Adrian ended the call and sat frozen in his chair. He'd been part of CoreLink, had contributed to the technology that made it valuable. And when Elena Ward's supposed death had triggered the transfer of assets, his name had been quietly erased from the records. They'd stolen from him, too. He just hadn't known it, and Elena Ward had known all along, had recognized him at the party, had protected him not out of arbitrary mercy, but because he'd been another victim of the same crime. The realization settled over him like a weight. He wasn't a bystander who'd gotten lucky. He was a collaborator who'd been robbed and didn't even realize it until 7 years later. And somewhere out there, Elena Ward was probably waiting to see what he'd do with that information. Adrian spent the next 2 hours digging through old files in a storage unit he'd forgotten he still paid for. Boxes of contracts and invoices from his early consulting days, back when he'd taken any project that would pay rent and student loans. His hands were shaking as he sorted through paper, searching for anything with CoreLink's name on it. He found it in the third box. A contract dated 8 years and 4 months ago. Network Security Consulting Services for CoreLink Technologies. 3 months of work. $20,000 total, paid in installments. And at the bottom, a clause about intellectual property, standard language stating that any inventions or innovations developed during the contract period would be jointly owned. Adrian had signed it without reading carefully. He'd been 24 and broke and just happy to have work. The patent filing was there too, buried in a manila envelope he didn't remember saving. 3 names listed as inventors: Elena Ward, Marcus Reinhardt, Adrian Hale. The technology described was exactly what had made CoreLink valuable, a revolutionary approach to network integration that allowed disparate systems to communicate seamlessly. He'd written maybe 15% of that code, solved a specific security problem that Elena and Marcus couldn't crack. Then he'd moved on to the next contract, the next problem, never thinking about it again. Until now. Adrian photographed everything with his phone, then sat on the concrete floor of the storage unit with dust settling around him and tried to process what this meant. He wasn't just a witness to fraud. He was a victim of it. When CoreLink's assets had been transferred after Elena's supposed death, his ownership stake had disappeared along with hers. He should have received compensation. Royalties, at minimum. The technology had been licensed to multiple companies over the years, generating millions in revenue that he'd never seen. His phone rang. Thomas Wright. Adrian, where are you? I've been trying to reach you for an hour. Storage unit found something interesting. More interesting than the fact that Marcus Reinhardt's attorneys just filed a motion to compel your testimony in a civil suit. They're claiming you conspired with Elena Ward to frame their client. Adrian laughed, though nothing was funny. They're half right. I did work with Elena Ward 8 years ago on CoreLink Technologies. My name was on the original patent filing. Silence on the other end. Then, what? I was a consultant. Contributed to the core technology, which means when they stole it from Elena, they stole it from me too. I just didn't know it until today. Jesus Christ. Thomas's voice went quiet. Adrian, this changes everything. You're not just a witness anymore. You're a victim with standing to sue. You could go after them for damages, lost royalties, intellectual property theft. I could also prove why Elena Ward protected me, why she edited the recordings. We were partners who got robbed. Which makes the prosecution's case stronger, not weaker. Defense can't argue conspiracy if you were both victims of the same crime. Thomas was thinking out loud now, lawyer brain engaged. But it also complicates your immunity agreement, because now you have financial motivation to see these people convicted. Defense will argue bias. Adrian stood up, dust falling from his clothes. So what do I do? You call Morrison. Right now. Tell her everything. Because if she finds out about this from someone else, like that journalist who contacted you, it looks like you were hiding material information. I wasn't hiding it. I genuinely didn't know. Doesn't matter how it looks. Call her. I'll conference in. Adrian made the call from his car, speakerphone active, while Thomas joined from his office. Morrison answered on the first ring, which somehow made everything feel more ominous. Mr. Hale, I was just about to call you. About the patent filing? Adrian asked. A pause. So you know. Found the contract and documentation this afternoon. I worked for CoreLink 8 years ago. Contributed to the technology. Had my name removed from subsequent filings when the assets were transferred. Morrison let out a long breath. Why didn't you mention this before? Because I didn't remember. It was one consulting contract among dozens. I never followed up on it, never knew my name was on a patent, never received any compensation. It was just another project. But Elena Ward remembered. Apparently. Which explains why she protected you. You weren't just an innocent bystander, you were a co-inventor who got robbed. Morrison's tone shifted to something sharper. Adrian, this is either really good for our case or really bad. Depends on how defense spins it. Thomas spoke up. How could this possibly be bad? It proves motive for evidence tampering was protective, not conspiratorial. Elena Ward removed Adrian from recordings because he was a fellow victim, not an accomplice. Or, Morrison countered, it proves they had a pre-existing relationship and financial motivation to coordinate testimony. Defense will argue Adrian stands to gain millions if these defendants are convicted, and he can file civil suits for stolen intellectual property. Adrian's stomach turned. I don't care about the money. You say that now, but defense attorneys will paint you as someone who's been waiting 8 years for revenge and finally found the perfect weapon in Elena Ward. Morrison paused. They're not entirely wrong, are they? I didn't know I had anything to take revenge for. But now you do. And that knowledge changes everything about your testimony, changes how juries will perceive you, changes whether your account seems objective or motivated by financial gain. Thomas cut in, what are you suggesting, that Adrian shouldn't testify? I'm suggesting we need to be very careful about how we present this information, because right now we have 2 victims of the same crime who happen to be in the same room 7 years later when one of them decided to burn everything down. That's either a remarkable coincidence or a planned conspiracy. It was a coincidence, Adrian said. I didn't know Elena would be there, didn't know she was alive, didn't know anything until she revealed herself that night. Can you prove that? How do you prove the absence of contact? I never called her, never emailed her, never met with her. But I can't document things that didn't happen. Morrison was quiet for a moment. Here's what's going to happen. I'm going to add this information to the case file. The patent documentation, your consulting contract, everything. It becomes part of the official record. Then we prepare you to testify not just as a witness, but as a victim. We own the narrative before defense tries to twist it. And if they still claim conspiracy? Thomas asked. Then we point to the fact that Adrian came forward with this information voluntarily, that he had no legal obligation to disclose it, but did anyway because he's cooperating fully with the investigation. Morrison's voice hardened. But Adrian, you need to understand, this puts a target on you. Defense is going to come after you hard. They'll dig into every aspect of your life looking for connections to Elena Ward, financial problems that might motivate false testimony, anything they can use to discredit you. Let them dig. They won't find anything. Everyone has something, Mr. Hale. The question is whether it's something that destroys your credibility. After the call ended, Adrian sat in his car outside the storage unit and watched the sun drop toward the horizon. Everything kept getting more complicated. Every answer revealed new questions. Every step forward felt like 2 steps into deeper water. His phone buzzed, the journalist, Sarah Mitchell, calling again. This time he answered. Mr. Hale, thank you for taking my call. I know you hung up earlier. I need to know how you found the patent information. Public records. Patent filings are available through the USPTO database. I was researching Elena Ward's work history and found the core link filing. Saw your name and started looking into your background. She paused. Can I ask, did you know you were listed as an inventor? No, not until you told me. That must have been quite a shock. Adrian laughed bitterly. That's one word for it. Mr. Hale, I meant what I said earlier. I'm not trying to write a hit piece. I'm trying to understand who Elena Ward really was. What drove her to spend 7 years planning this? And I think you might be the only person who can help me understand. Why do you care? What's your angle? Sarah was quiet for a moment. Because I was her roommate at MIT. We lived together sophomore and junior year, and when I heard she died in that car accident, I knew something was wrong. Elena was the most careful driver I'd ever met. She was deliberate about everything. The idea that she'd crash on a highway didn't make sense. Adrian's grip on the phone tightened. You knew her. I did. Not as well as I thought, apparently, since she managed to fake her death without telling me. But I knew her well enough to know that what those investors did to her, stealing her life's work, it would have destroyed her, or transformed her into something else entirely. It did both, I think. Will you meet with me? Off the record if you prefer. I just want to understand what happened in that penthouse. What she said, how she seemed. Adrian thought about Morrison's warning, about defense attorneys looking for any connection between him and Elena that could suggest conspiracy. Meeting with a journalist who'd known her seemed like exactly the kind of thing that could be twisted into evidence of coordination. But he also wanted to understand. Needed to know who Elena Ward had been before she became a ghost, before she spent 7 years preparing perfect revenge. Tomorrow, he said. Coffee shop on Amsterdam and 73rd, 9 a.m. I'll be there. And Mr. Hale? Thank you. That evening, Adrian picked up his daughter from after-school care and took her to the park, even though it was getting dark and cold. She needed normal, needed to run and play and forget that kids at school were being cruel, that her father's name was in the news for bad reasons. She raced toward the swings, and Adrian followed more slowly, checking his phone out of habit. 3 missed calls from numbers he didn't recognize. Probably reporters. The story about the patent filing would break soon, and then there'd be a whole new wave of coverage. New questions, new scrutiny. "Daddy, push me!" His daughter's voice cut through his thoughts. He pocketed his phone and pushed her swing, watching her laugh as she went higher. This was real. This mattered. Everything else was just noise. "Higher," she demanded. "Any higher and you'll fly away." "Good. I want to fly." Adrian pushed her higher, and for a few minutes the world narrowed to just this. His daughter's laughter, the squeak of the swing chains, the cool evening air. Simple and clean and uncomplicated. Then his phone rang. He almost ignored it, but the caller ID showed Morrison's number. "I need to take this," he told his daughter. "Keep swinging, but not too high, okay?" "Okay, Daddy." He stepped away, answered the call. "Morrison." "Adrian, we have a situation. Elena Ward contacted us." Everything stopped. "What?" "She sent a video message to the FBI director. Just hit his inbox 20 minutes ago. Verified as authentic. She's offering to testify." Adrian's mind raced. Why? She's been invisible for weeks. Why surface now? Because the defense's evidence tampering claims are working. 2 judges have already expressed concerns about the edited recordings. If Elena doesn't explain why she made those edits and confirm the recording's accuracy, our case might fall apart. Morrison sounded exhausted. She's willing to appear via video testimony. Won't reveal her location or appear in person, but she'll answer questions under oath. That's insane. Defense will tear her apart. She tampered with evidence, faked her death, engaged in what they'll call vigilante justice. I know, but it might be our only option, and she made one condition. Morrison paused. She wants you there, says she'll only testify if you're in the room. Adrian felt cold. Why? She didn't say. Just that her testimony is conditional on your presence. This is exactly what defense will use to prove conspiracy. If she's demanding I be there, I know. Which is why I need you to think very carefully about whether you agree to this. Because once you're in that room together, even virtually, it creates an association that defense will exploit. Adrian watched his daughter on the swings, unaware that her father was being pulled deeper into something he still didn't fully understand. "When?" he asked. "Depositions start in 3 days. She wants to go first, wants to establish the timeline and explain her actions before anyone else testifies. And if I say no, then she doesn't testify. Our case gets weaker. Defense claims victory on the evidence tampering issue. Some or all of the defendants might walk. So I don't really have a choice. You always have a choice, but some choices come with consequences we can't control." After Morrison hung up, Adrian stood in the growing darkness and watched his daughter play. He should tell her it was time to go. Should take her home, make dinner, read stories, maintain the routine that kept her world stable. Instead, he called Thomas. "Tell me the worst-case scenario," Adrian said when the lawyer answered. "If I'm in the room when Elena testifies, if defense uses it to claim conspiracy, what's the absolute worst that could happen?" Thomas didn't hesitate. "They discredit both of you. Jury believes you coordinated testimony. Defendants walk. And then they sue you and Elena for defamation, malicious prosecution, whatever their lawyers can dream up. You lose everything, your company, your assets, your reputation, and maybe custody of your daughter if they can prove you engaged in criminal conspiracy. Adrian's blood went cold. They could take her? If they convince a judge you committed crimes and lied under oath? Yes. It's a long shot, but it's possible. Then I can't do it. I can't risk her. Adrian, listen to me. The worst-case scenario is unlikely. Possible, but unlikely. What's more likely is that defense tries to create doubt, fails because the evidence is overwhelming, and the defendants get convicted anyway. Your presence in the room during Elena's testimony might raise questions, but it won't automatically destroy the case. Might not. But it could. Everything could. That's the nature of trials. That's why we prepare, why we build strong cases, why we don't leave anything to chance. Thomas's voice softened. But I understand if you want to walk away. You've already given them everything they asked for, more than they asked for. At some point, you're allowed to protect yourself and your daughter. Adrian ended the call and walked back to the swings. His daughter had stopped pumping her legs and was just sitting there, dragging her feet in the dirt. You looked sad, she said when he approached. On the phone. Just complicated adult stuff. Is it about the bad people again? Yeah, it's about them. She slipped off the swing and took his hand. Mrs. Thompson says when things are hard, you should do the right thing, even if it's scary. Is that true? Adrian looked down at his daughter's trusting face and felt something crack in his chest. Yes, sweetheart, that's true. So are you going to do the right thing? I'm trying to figure out what that is. She squeezed his hand. You'll know. You're smart. They walked home through darkening streets, and Adrian tried to reconcile the competing truths. Protecting his daughter was the right thing, but letting guilty people escape justice because he was afraid, was that right? And what about Elena Ward, who'd spent 7 years as a ghost, who'd orchestrated perfect revenge only to watch it potentially unravel because of legal technicalities? At home, he made dinner on autopilot while his daughter colored at the kitchen table. His phone kept buzzing with messages he wasn't reading. At some point, Maria texted asking if he needed her to come by. He said no. Tonight, he needed to be alone with his thoughts and his daughter. After dinner, after bath time, after stories and tucked-in blankets, Adrian returned to his office and opened his laptop. He pulled up the patent filing again, studied the 3 names listed as inventors. Elena Ward, Marcus Reinhardt, Adrian Hale. One of those people had faked their death and spent 7 years planning revenge. One was currently facing federal charges that would likely put him in prison for decades, and one was sitting in a home office trying to decide if testifying alongside a ghost was worth the risk. His phone buzzed. Unknown number. Text message. I know what I'm asking. I wouldn't ask if there were another way. Elena. Adrian stared at the message, then typed back. Why me? Why do you need me there? 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Finally, because you're the only person in this entire mess who actually earned what they built, who didn't steal or cheat or destroy people to succeed, and I need someone in that room who remembers that's possible. I'm not that person. I looked the other way for years, made money off connections to people who committed crimes. But you stopped. You walked away. That's more than most people do. Adrian's hand shook as he typed. If I do this, if I'm there when you testify, I could lose everything, my company, my reputation, maybe even my daughter. I know, I'm sorry. I never meant to drag you into this. But you did, by protecting me, by editing those recordings, by making me a witness to something I didn't fully understand. Yes. And if I could undo it, I would. But I can't. All I can do is try to finish what I started and hope the people who deserve consequences actually face them. Adrian thought about Veronica Chen offering to testify on his behalf despite her own legal problems, about David warning him to watch his back, about his daughter asking if he was going to do the right thing. If I agree to this, he typed, I need you to promise me something. What? After you testify, after this is over, you disappear for real. You don't contact me again. You don't involve me in whatever comes next. My daughter deserves a life that doesn't include any of this. Long pause. Then, I promise. After the testimony, I'm gone. Adrian sat with that for a moment, then typed, Okay, I'll be there. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. This could destroy both of us. I've already been destroyed once, second time's easier. The conversation ended, and Adrian sat in the silence of his office, wondering if he'd just made the biggest mistake of his life, or the only choice his conscience would allow. He called Morrison back. "I'll do it," he said when she answered. "I'll be there when Elena testifies." "Are you sure? Because once you commit, I'm sure. Tell me what I need to prepare." Morrison walked him through the logistics. The deposition would be held in a secure federal facility. Elena would appear via encrypted video feed from an undisclosed location. Defense attorneys would be present, asking questions designed to discredit and destroy. Adrian would be in the room as a witness and victim, there to corroborate certain facts about CoreLink's original development. "It's going to be brutal," Morrison warned. "Defense will try to prove you and Elena coordinated from the beginning. They'll suggest you've been in contact for years, planning this together. You need to be prepared for very personal questions about your finances, your relationships, your decision-making over the last 8 years." "I don't have anything to hide." "Everyone has something to hide. The question is whether it's something that undermines your credibility." The next morning, Adrian met Sarah Mitchell at the coffee shop. She was younger than he'd expected, maybe 30, with intelligent eyes and a notebook that looked well used. "Mr. Hale, thank you for meeting me. Call me Adrian, and I'm not sure how much help I can be." Sarah ordered coffee for both of them, then pulled out her notebook. "Can you tell me about working with Elena 8 years ago? What was she like?" Adrian thought back, trying to remember details from a contract that had felt insignificant at the time. Intense, focused. She knew exactly what she wanted to build and why. "I was just there to solve a specific problem." "What kind of problem?" "Network security. She and Marcus were building this integration platform, but they couldn't figure out how to keep it secure when connecting to outside systems. I wrote some encryption protocols, did some penetration testing, helped close the vulnerabilities." "And then what?" "Then my contract ended. I got paid, moved on to the next project. Never thought about it again." Sarah made notes. "Did you stay in touch with Elena?" "No, it was a professional relationship. We probably had a handful of conversations total. Most of my work was solo." "What about Marcus Reinhardt?" "Met him twice, briefly. He was more the business side. Elena was the technical visionary." Sarah looked up from her notes. "Adrian, can I ask you something off the record?" He nodded. "Do you think she's a hero or a villain?" The question hit harder than expected. Adrian thought about Elena serving champagne to people who'd destroyed her, about 7 years of invisibility and planning, about the recordings that had brought down Manhattan's elite, about the protection she'd given him by editing out his voice. "I think she's someone who was pushed past her breaking point and found a way to push back," he said finally. "Whether that makes her a hero or a villain probably depends on which side of that penthouse you were standing on." "Which side were you on?" "The wrong side. Until I wasn't." Sarah smiled slightly. "That's honest. Most people would try to spin it better." "I'm tired of spinning, tired of pretending. The truth is, I spent years building relationships with people who were criminals, and I either didn't notice or didn't care because it benefited me. That doesn't make me a criminal, but it doesn't make me innocent either. And now you're testifying against them." "Now I'm testifying to what I saw and heard. Let the jury decide what it means." They talked for another hour. Sarah asked about the night of the party, about Adrian's observations of Elena, about the moment everything had collapsed. He told her what he could without compromising the prosecution's case, and she listened without judgment, just occasionally making notes. "One last question," Sarah said as they were wrapping up. "If you could talk to Elena now, what would you say?" Adrian considered that. "I'd ask if it was worth it, if destroying them fixed whatever they broke, or if revenge just created new kinds of emptiness." "Do you think she'd answer honestly?" "I think she'd tell me it wasn't about fixing anything. It was about making sure they finally faced consequences. And whether that was worth it, that's something only she can know." Sarah closed her notebook. "Thank you, Adrian. This was helpful. When's your article coming out?" "Not until after the trial. I want to see how it ends before I write about how it began." They parted ways, and Adrian walked back to his car feeling strangely lighter. Talking about it openly, admitting his complicity and his mistakes, had felt like releasing pressure from a valve he'd been holding closed for too long. His phone rang. "David." "Hey," Adrian answered. "How's the new job?" "Soulless but lucrative. Listen, I heard you're testifying at Elena Ward's deposition. News travels fast. Adrian, are you insane? You know what defense is going to do to you in that room?" I've been briefed. Being briefed and experiencing it are different things. These attorneys are sharks. They'll tear into every decision you've made, every relationship you've had, every dollar you've earned. And they'll do it in front of cameras and reporters and everyone you've ever done business with. I know. And you're doing it anyway? I don't have much choice. David was quiet for a moment. Yeah, I guess you don't. He sighed. For what it's worth, I think you're doing the right thing, even if it costs you everything. That's not very comforting. Truth usually isn't. After David hung up, Adrian sat in his car and watched people move through their ordinary days, coffee runs, work commutes, problems that probably felt overwhelming to them, but were small and manageable compared to the disaster consuming his life. 3 days until the deposition. 3 days to prepare for questions he couldn't anticipate, attacks he couldn't fully defend against, risks he couldn't entirely calculate. 3 days until he sat in a room with a ghost and tried to explain how they'd both been robbed by people who'd thought themselves untouchable. He started the car and drove to pick up his daughter from school. And for the entire drive, he tried to imagine how he'd explain all of this to her someday. When she was old enough to understand, old enough to ask why her father had made the choices he'd made. He hoped by then he'd have better answers than he had right now. But hope and certainty were different things, and Adrian had learned enough in the last month to know that certainty was mostly an illusion people told themselves to feel safe. The only thing he knew for certain was that in 3 days, everything would change again. And this time, he'd be standing in the center of it instead of watching from the edges. The morning of the deposition arrived cold and gray, the kind of November day that made Manhattan feel like it was closing in on itself. Adrian dressed carefully, not the expensive suits he'd worn to penthouse parties, but something simpler, professional but not arrogant. He wanted to look like someone telling the truth, not someone performing credibility. His daughter had asked why he was wearing a tie when it wasn't Sunday church, and he told her he had an important meeting. She'd accepted that without questions, which somehow made it worse. 4 years old and already learning that Daddy's life was full of things too complicated to explain. Maria arrived early to take her to school. "Good luck today," she said quietly at the door. And Adrian appreciated that she didn't ask for details or offer platitudes about everything working out fine. Thomas met him outside the federal building downtown, carrying a briefcase that probably contained enough documentation to rebuild Adrian's entire professional history if needed. "Ready?" Thomas asked. "No, but I'm here." "That'll have to be enough." They went through security, took an elevator to the 8th floor, walked down corridors that smelled like floor polish and anxiety. Morrison met them outside a conference room that looked too ordinary for what was about to happen inside. "Elena's already connected," Morrison said. "She's on video, but we can't see her location. It verified the encryption is solid. There's no way to trace her signal." She looked at Adrian. "Defense is going to push hard on your relationship with her. Remember what we discussed. Answer only what's asked. Don't elaborate. Don't try to explain motivations. Just the facts. Just the facts." Inside the conference room, 5 defense attorneys sat on one side of a long table. Adrian recognized 2 of them from news coverage, expensive lawyers who specialized in keeping wealthy criminals out of prison. They looked at him like he was something they'd stepped in. At the head of the table, a large monitor showed a black screen with audio meters jumping. Elena was there, listening, waiting. Morrison handled the preliminaries, names for the record, acknowledgement that testimony was under oath, technical verification that the video feed was secure and functional. Then she nodded to the defense team. "You may proceed." The lead attorney, a man named Gerald Voss, who'd defended 3 senators and a Fortune 500 CEO, stood up like he was addressing a jury. "Ms. Ward, let's start with a simple question. How long have you known Adrian Hale?" Elena's voice came through the speakers, clear and steady. 8 years and 3 months. We worked together on Core Link Technologies." "And have you maintained contact with Mr. Hale since that time?" "No. We had no contact between the end of his consulting contract and the night of the gathering at the penthouse." "No contact, no emails, no phone calls, no messages of any kind?" "None." Voss smiled slightly. "Ms. Ward, you expect us to believe that you spent 7 years planning an elaborate revenge scheme, that you happened to encounter Mr. Hale at the very gathering where you executed that scheme, and that this was pure coincidence?" "I didn't say it was coincidence. I knew he'd be there. I researched everyone who would attend that party." "So you sought him out. I sought out everyone in that room, including your clients, Mr. Voss, including people who destroyed my life and thought they'd gotten away with it. Voss's smile faded. And yet Mr. Hale is the only person whose voice you edited out of your recordings. Why is that? Because he wasn't part of the original crime. He contributed to technology that was stolen from both of us. He was a victim, not a perpetrator. How convenient. The one person who could corroborate your accusations just happens to be someone you decided to protect. Voss turned to Adrian. Mr. Hale, when did you learn about the patent filing that included your name? Adrian kept his voice level. 3 weeks ago. A journalist researching Elena's background found the documentation and contacted me. And before that, you had no idea you were listed as an inventor? None. I was a consultant. I completed my work and moved on. I never followed up on patent filings or commercialization. Never followed up on technology that was worth hundreds of millions of dollars? That seems remarkably incurious for someone in your field. Thomas spoke up. Is there a question, counselor? Voss didn't look away from Adrian. Mr. Hale, isn't it true that you've maintained business relationships with several of the defendants for the past 6 years? Yes. You've accepted their investments, used their networks, profited from their connections? Yes. And yet now you claim to be a victim of their criminal activity. Which is it, Mr. Hale? Are you a victim or a beneficiary? Adrian felt the trap closing. Both. I didn't know what they'd done to CoreLink, didn't know my name had been removed from patent filings or that I was owed compensation, but I did benefit from relationships with people who'd committed fraud. Those two things can both be true. How convenient that you discovered your victim status just as federal investigators needed witnesses against my clients. I discovered it when a journalist found public records that I'd never looked for. The timing was coincidental, not convenient. Voss pulled out a document. Mr. Hale, this is your immunity agreement with the federal prosecutors. You're aware that this protects you from charges related to your associations with the defendants? Yes. And you're aware that if these defendants are convicted, you could file civil suits seeking damages for stolen intellectual property, potentially worth millions of dollars? Adrian's stomach turned. I'm aware that's theoretically possible. Theoretically? Voss's voice dripped with contempt. Mr. Hale, you stand to gain financially from the conviction of people you've done business with for years. You've been granted immunity for your own questionable associations, and you expect us to believe your testimony is objective? I expect you to believe I'm telling the truth about what I saw and heard, the truth as shaped by Ms. Ward, who edited recordings to remove your voice and protect you from scrutiny. Voss turned back to the monitor. Miss Ward, let's talk about those edits. You removed portions of conversations where Mr. Hale participated. Why? Elena's response was immediate. Because his participation was minimal and not relevant to the criminal activity I was documenting. He asked a few questions, made polite conversation. Nothing that contributed to evidence of fraud. But you made that determination unilaterally. You decided what was relevant and what wasn't. You tampered with evidence to protect someone you claim is just a coincidental associate. I protected someone who was innocent of the crimes I was exposing. That's not tampering. That's accuracy. Accuracy? Voss's voice rose. You faked your own death, spent 7 years in hiding, infiltrated a private gathering under false pretenses, and recorded conversations without consent. And you have the audacity to talk about accuracy? I have the audacity to talk about justice, something your clients have avoided for nearly a decade. The room went quiet. Adrian watched the defense attorneys exchange glances, recalibrating their approach. Elena had just given them ammunition, admitted to deception, to manipulation, to actions that could be framed as vigilante justice rather than legitimate evidence gathering. Another attorney stood up, a woman named Patricia Kern, who specialized in destroying witness credibility. Miss Ward, you claim you've had no contact with Mr. Hale for 8 years. Can you prove that? How does one prove the absence of contact? Exactly. You can't. Which means we only have your word that you and Mr. Hale didn't coordinate this entire scheme. Kern pulled out more documents. Mr. Hale, these are your phone records for the past year, subpoenaed as part of discovery. Can you explain the 17 calls to numbers that registered as unknown or private? Adrian felt sweat prickle at his neck. I get spam calls, telemarketing, wrong numbers. 17 calls that you answered and that lasted more than 30 seconds each. That's a lot of wrong numbers, Mr. Hale. I don't track every call I receive. Sometimes I answer before I realize it's spam. Or sometimes you answer because it's Ms. Ward calling from an untraceable number to coordinate your testimony. Thomas cut in. Unless you have evidence that any of those calls came from Ms. Ward, this is pure speculation. It's reasonable inference based on suspicious patterns, Kern shot back. She turned to Elena's video feed. Ms. Ward, did you contact Mr. Hale at any point in the last year? No? Not once? Not even after you decided to move forward with your plan? Not once. Then how did you know he'd be at the gathering? I knew everyone who'd be invited. I'd been working for the catering company for 6 months. I saw the guest lists for every event. Kern smiled. So you had access to Mr. Hale's schedule, knew where he'd be and when. But you expect us to believe you never reached out to warn him, prepare him, coordinate with him in any way? I expect you to believe the truth. I had no contact with Adrian Hale until the night I revealed myself in that penthouse. And yet you protected him, edited him out of recordings, let him leave before federal agents arrived. Why would you do that for a stranger? Elena was quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice had changed, softer, more raw. Because when they stole CoreLink, they didn't just steal from me. They stole from everyone who'd contributed to building it. Adrian was a consultant who did good work and deserved credit. When they erased his name from the patent filings, they robbed him just like they robbed me. Maybe he didn't know it happened. Maybe he never would have known if I hadn't exposed them. But that doesn't make it less real. But how touching, Kern said. A vigilante with a conscience. Tell me, Ms. Ward, did you feel this protective of all the people whose lives you disrupted? The employees who lost jobs when you froze company accounts? The retirees whose pensions were affected by your actions? The people who committed the crimes are responsible for those consequences, not me. I exposed fraud. What happened after that is on them. You destroyed evidence, manipulated financial systems, and caused chaos that affected thousands of innocent people. That's not exposure, Ms. Ward. That's revenge. Adrian watched Elena's audio meters jump as she responded. Call it whatever you want. Your clients committed crimes and avoided consequences for 7 years. I made sure they finally faced accountability. If that's revenge, then fine. But it's also justice. The deposition continued for 6 more hours. Defense attorneys rotated through, each one attacking from different angles, questioning Elena's credibility, Adrian's motivations, the legitimacy of the recordings, the methods used to obtain evidence. They were systematic and brutal, turning every answer into another question, every explanation into potential proof of conspiracy. By the time Morrison called for a break, Adrian's head throbbed and his throat was dry from answering the same question 17 different ways. In a small room down the hall, Thomas handed him water and aspirin. You're doing fine. They're fishing. They haven't landed anything concrete. They've established that Elena and I both benefit from convictions, that we both had access to information about each other, that there are gaps in our ability to prove we didn't coordinate. Gaps aren't proof. The jury will see that defense is grasping at straws. Thomas checked his watch. We've got 15 minutes, then we go back in for round 2. Adrian drank his water and tried to prepare himself for more of the same, but when they returned to the conference room, the atmosphere had shifted. The defense attorneys were huddled together, whispering urgently. Morrison looked tense. Voss stood as soon as everyone was seated. We'd like to enter new evidence into the record, evidence that substantially changes the nature of this testimony. Morrison's expression hardened. What evidence? Voss pulled out a manila folder. Bank records showing a wire transfer from an offshore account to Mr. Hale's business 3 weeks ago. The same offshore account that Miss Ward used to freeze our client's assets. Adrian's blood went cold. That's impossible, is it? According to these records, verified by our forensic accountants, you received $250,000 from an account registered in the Cayman Islands, an account that Ms. Ward controlled. I never received any money from Elena. I don't even have access to offshore accounts. Voss slid the documents across the table. These records say otherwise. Adrian grabbed them, scanning the pages. There was his company name. There was an account number he didn't recognize. There was a transfer dated 3 weeks ago, right after he'd discovered the patent filing. This is fabricated, he said. Someone planted this to discredit my testimony. Or Ms. Ward paid you to testify in a manner favorable to the prosecution, Kern said. $250,000 is a substantial incentive to lie under oath. Thomas grabbed the documents, studied them quickly. These need to be verified. Anyone can create fake bank records. Until we confirm their authenticity, they've been verified, Voss interrupted, by 3 separate forensic accountants. The transfer is real. The account exists, and Mr. Hale's denial only makes his testimony more suspect. Morrison stood. We need to recess. Now. Absolutely not, Voss said. This is our deposition. We have the right to question the witness about evidence of potential perjury and coordination. You have the right to question, but I'm advising my witness to stop answering until we've verified these documents and determined their legitimacy. The room erupted in argument, defense attorneys demanding answers, Morrison insisting on verification, Thomas pulling Adrian aside to whisper urgently about how to respond. Through it all, Elena's video feed remained active, her audio meters bouncing with sounds Adrian couldn't interpret. Finally, her voice cut through the chaos. Stop! Everyone turned toward the monitor. The transfer is real, Elena said quietly. I made it 3 weeks ago. Adrian felt like he'd been punched. What? I transferred money to your company account because you deserved compensation for stolen intellectual property. I knew you'd never pursue it yourself, never hire lawyers and fight for what was owed. So I took it from the accounts I'd frozen, accounts full of money stolen from me and from you, and I gave you what you were owed. You can't just... Adrian couldn't find words. You can't transfer money without consent. That's illegal? Yes. So is stealing someone's life work. So is fraud and tax evasion and market manipulation. I did a lot of illegal things to expose people who did worse illegal things. Adding one more to the list doesn't change anything. Voss looked like he'd just won the lottery. So you admit it. You paid Mr. Hale to support your accusations. I gave him money he was owed. Money that should have come from licensing fees and patent royalties over the last 7 years. If he'd known his name was on those patents, he could have filed civil suits years ago. I just expedited the process. Without his knowledge or consent. Yes. Which means Mr. Hale has been receiving money from you and didn't disclose it in his testimony today. Adrian stood up, his chair scraping loud against the floor. I didn't know. I swear I had no idea that money came from Elena. I thought... He stopped, realizing he couldn't remember actually checking his business accounts in the last 3 weeks. Everything had been chaos. He'd been focused on legal preparation, on keeping his company from complete collapse, on protecting his daughter. Thomas grabbed his arm. Don't say anything else. Not until we verify the accounts and determine what actually happened. But Adrian could see it in the defense attorneys' faces. They'd won. Whether Elena had meant to help or hurt him, she'd just destroyed his credibility. He testified under oath without knowing he'd received $250,000 from the person whose accusations he was corroborating. The prosecution's case had just developed a massive hole. Morrison called for an immediate recess. The room cleared except for her, Thomas, and Adrian. Tell me you didn't know about the transfer, Morrison said. I didn't. I swear. Check your accounts. Right now. Adrian pulled out his phone with shaking hands and logged into his business banking. It took 3 tries to get the password right. When the account finally loaded, he scrolled back through transactions. There it was. 3 weeks ago. A wire transfer from International Holdings, LLC, for $250,000. He'd been so focused on calls from lawyers and interviews with FBI agents that he hadn't even noticed a massive deposit. I didn't see it, he said numbly. I've been in survival mode. I haven't checked balances in weeks. That's not going to matter to a jury, Morrison said. All they'll hear is that you received money from Elena Ward and didn't disclose it. Defense will argue you were paid to lie, that everything you've testified to is compromised by financial interest. But I told the truth. Everything I said was accurate. I believe you. But belief isn't evidence. And right now, the evidence says you're a paid witness who lied about being a neutral observer. Thomas was already on his phone talking to someone about account verification and tracing the transfer. Adrian sat down heavily and tried to process what had just happened. Elena had tried to help him, had given him money she thought he deserved, and in doing so, she'd destroyed the one thing that made his testimony valuable, his apparent lack of financial motivation. We need to regroup, Morrison said. Figure out how to salvage this. Maybe if we can prove Adrian genuinely didn't know about the transfer, that he had no reason to check accounts during this chaos. It won't matter, Adrian interrupted. Defense has what they need. They'll hammer this until the jury can't see past it. Elena and I are both finished as credible witnesses. Morrison didn't argue. She just gathered her files and left the room, leaving Adrian alone with Thomas and the wreckage of good intentions. An hour later, they reconvened. The defense had already filed motions to strike both Adrian's and Elena's testimony as tainted by financial coordination. They were calling for dismissal of charges based on compromised evidence. Morrison fought back, arguing that the transfer didn't prove coordination, that Adrian's ignorance was genuine and verifiable. But even she sounded tired, defeated. When the judge finally spoke, appearing via video from her chambers, her expression was grave. "This is a complicated situation," Judge Martinez said. "Mr. Hale appears to have genuinely been unaware of the transfer. Miss Ward's actions, while illegal, seem motivated by a sense of compensation rather than witness tampering. However, the appearance of impropriety is undeniable." Adrian held his breath. "I'm not dismissing the charges," the judge continued, "but I'm striking Mr. Hale's testimony from the record and barring him from testifying at trial. His credibility has been too compromised by the financial connection, regardless of his awareness of it." "Your Honor," Morrison started. "My decision is final, Counselor. As for Miss Ward's testimony, I'll allow it to stand, but the jury will be informed of the transfer and given instructions about evaluating her credibility in light of it." Judge Martinez looked directly at Elena's video feed. "Ms. Ward, your actions, however well-intentioned, have significantly complicated this prosecution. I hope you understand that." Elena's response was quiet. "I understand, Your Honor. I was trying to correct an injustice. I see now that I may have created new ones instead." The deposition ended shortly after. Defense attorneys left looking satisfied. Morrison left looking exhausted. Thomas stayed with Adrian as the room emptied. "I'm sorry," Thomas said finally. "I know this isn't what you wanted." Adrian laughed bitterly. "I didn't want any of this. I wanted to build a company and raise my daughter and live a normal life. Instead, I got caught in someone else's war and now I'm collateral damage." "You're not damage. You're a victim who tried to do the right thing. That still matters." "Does it? Because from where I'm sitting, trying to do the right thing just cost me my credibility, my testimony, and any hope of actually seeing justice done." Thomas didn't have an answer to that. Adrian left the federal building in late afternoon light that felt wrong for how dark everything had become. His phone buzzed constantly. Reporters who'd somehow gotten his number, business associates distancing themselves, worried messages from Maria about his daughter asking when he'd be home. He drove aimlessly for a while, not ready to face his daughter's questions or Maria's concerned looks, not ready to pretend that today had been just another meeting, just another complicated piece of adult business. Eventually, he ended up at the park where he'd taken his daughter weeks ago. The swings were empty now, moving slightly in the cold wind. Adrian sat on a bench and watched the sun drop toward the horizon. His phone buzzed again, an unknown number. He almost didn't answer. "Hello? Adrian," Elena's voice. "I'm sorry." He should hang up, should refuse to talk to the person who just destroyed his credibility and complicated everything beyond repair. Instead, he said, "Why did you do it?" "Because you deserve that money. Because they stole from you and I couldn't stand watching you struggle while they profited from technology you helped build." "So you decided to help without asking if I wanted help? Without considering that it might make everything worse? I thought I was fixing something. I see now I was just breaking it differently." Adrian laughed without humor. "Yeah, that seems to be going around." Silence on the line. Then Elena spoke again, her voice carrying 7 years of exhaustion. "I spent so long being invisible, being the person no one noticed or cared about. And I told myself it was strategy, that I was gathering evidence and building a case and preparing perfect revenge. But the truth is, I forgot how to be visible, forgot how to ask for help or trust that anyone else could understand." "So you did everything alone?" "Yes, and I told myself that made me strong, that independence was power." She paused. "But watching what happened today, watching you get hurt because I tried to help in the only way I knew how, I realize independence can also be isolation. And isolation makes you do things that feel right in the moment but damage everyone around you." Adrian thought about his own isolation. The years of building a company alone, of making decisions without consulting anyone, of keeping people at arm's length because trust felt dangerous. He told himself he was protecting his daughter, protecting himself. But maybe he'd just been afraid of being vulnerable. "I don't know if they're going to convict," Elena said quietly. "The defense did what they needed to do today, created doubt, made me look like a vigilante and you look like a paid witness. The jury might decide that even if the defendants committed crimes, our methods of exposing them were too questionable to trust. And if they walk, then they walk. And I disappear for real this time. And 7 years of planning amounts to nothing but a spectacular failure." Adrian heard the defeat in her voice and recognized it because he felt it too. They'd both tried to fight systems bigger than themselves. Both tried to stand up against corruption and power. Both learned that good intentions didn't guarantee just outcomes. "There's a journalist named Sarah Mitchell," Adrian said. "She knew you at MIT. She's writing about all of this." "I know. She called me last week. I didn't answer." "Maybe you should. Tell her your side. Not for the trial, but for the record. So when people look back at this, they understand why you did what you did." "What good would that do?" "I don't know, but I'm tired of being silent. Tired of watching truth get buried under legal technicalities and media narratives. Maybe the jury won't convict. Maybe the system will protect the people it always protects. But at least there'll be a record of what actually happened. That has to count for something." Elena was quiet for so long, Adrian thought she'd hung up. Then, "Adrian? Yeah? Thank you. For trying. For testifying even when it cost you everything. For being one person in that room who actually gave a damn about something beyond money and power. I didn't do it for noble reasons. I did it because I was scared and angry and didn't know what else to do." That's the most honest thing anyone said through this entire mess. The call ended. Adrian sat on the bench until the park lights flickered on and the cold made his hands numb. Then he drove home to his daughter, who was waiting with Maria and 1,000 questions about where he'd been. He told her he'd had a hard day, that sometimes grown-up work didn't go the way you planned, that he loved her more than anything in the world, and that would never change no matter what happened. She accepted this with the resilience of children who trust their parents even when they don't understand the details. They read stories before bed, and she fell asleep holding his hand like she used to when she was younger, and storms scared her. Adrian stayed there long after she was asleep, watching her breathe, thinking about legacy and choices, and the gap between who you want to be and who you actually are when tested. The trial lasted 6 weeks. Adrian watched coverage from a distance, read articles, saw snippets on news channels, but didn't attend in person. His testimony had been struck from the record. His role in the story was finished. The jury deliberated for 4 days. When they finally returned, they convicted on some charges and acquitted on others. Marcus Reinhardt got 15 years. Veronica Chen got 8. Jonathan Westbrook got 12. Catherine Aldridge was acquitted entirely, her lawyers successfully arguing that being present at a party where crimes were discussed didn't make her complicit. It was partial justice, imperfect. Some people punished, some people escaping, most of the damage already done regardless of verdicts. Elena Ward never testified at trial. The prosecutors decided her credibility was too compromised after the transfer revelation. The recordings she'd provided were admitted as evidence, but defense attorneys successfully planted enough doubt about their editing and authenticity that the jury couldn't fully rely on them. In the end, convictions came from forensic accounting, from paper trails and bank records and traditional investigation, the boring work of federal agents following money through complex systems. Elena's spectacular exposure had started the process, but it couldn't finish it alone. She disappeared completely after the trial. No interviews with Sarah Mitchell, no victory statements, no attempts to claim credit or vindication, just silence, which was probably what invisibility felt like after it became permanent. Adrian's company survived, barely. The $250,000 from Elena helped, though he'd initially considered refusing it or donating it to charity. In the end, pragmatism won over pride. He had employees to pay, a daughter to raise, a business to rebuild on cleaner foundations. He cut ties with everyone associated with the scandal, restructured his investor base, brought in David as a partner. His former COO had grown tired of the soulless but lucrative job and wanted to build something meaningful again. They were smaller now, less ambitious, but more sustainable, less spectacular, but more honest. 6 months after the trial, Sarah Mitchell published her article. Not in a financial journal, but in a long-form magazine known for investigative journalism. The piece was called The Cost of Invisibility, Elena Ward and the Price of Justice. Adrian read it alone in his office, after his daughter was asleep. Sarah had tracked down Elena's history from MIT through the founding of CoreLink, through the supposed death, through 7 years of working service jobs while planning revenge. She'd interviewed former classmates, professors, people who'd known her before the world broke her. The article didn't paint Elena as a hero or a villain. It painted her as a person who'd been destroyed and had found only one way to put herself back together, through systematic dismantling of the people who'd destroyed her. It asked hard questions about justice systems that protected the powerful and broke the vulnerable, about what people become when every legitimate channel for accountability fails them. At the end of the piece, Sarah included a quote from an unnamed source that Adrian recognized immediately as Elena. "I thought revenge would feel satisfying, like checking a box that had been empty for years. Instead, it just feels empty in different ways. The people who hurt me are punished, some of them at least, but I'm still 7 years older and fundamentally alone and no closer to being the person I was before they took everything. So was it worth it? I honestly don't know. Ask me again in another 7 years when the anger finally fades and I can see clearly what I actually accomplished versus what I destroyed along the way." Adrian closed the article and sat in the quiet of his office thinking about anger and justice, and the ways people try to make sense of damage they didn't deserve. He thought about his daughter sleeping upstairs, about the choices he'd make to protect her, about the line between justified action and destructive obsession. He didn't have answers, but he had something he hadn't had 6 months ago: clarity about who he wanted to be. Not someone who looked away from inconvenient truths. Not someone who built success on associations with people who succeeded through exploitation. Not someone who waited until consequences arrived to start examining his choices. A year after the trial, Adrian sold his company. Not because it was failing, but because he realized he didn't want to spend the next 20 years chasing growth and market share and quarterly returns. He wanted to be present for his daughter. Wanted to build things that mattered more than they profited. He used the money to start a foundation that provided legal support for inventors and entrepreneurs who'd had their intellectual property stolen by larger companies. It was small work, helping one person at a time navigate systems designed to crush individual claims. But it was work that felt meaningful in ways his previous career never had. His daughter started first grade, made friends whose parents didn't whisper about her father, came home with art projects and spelling tests and stories about playground dramas that felt beautifully ordinary. Sometimes Adrian wondered about Elena, where she'd gone, who she'd become, whether she'd found any peace in the aftermath of her perfect revenge. He'd kept her number in his phone even though he knew she'd never call again. Some part of him hoped she was okay, that she'd found a way to be visible again without it destroying her. But mostly, he tried not to think about it. The scandal had receded into history, replaced by newer outrages and fresher disasters. The defendants who'd been convicted served their sentences in minimum security facilities that barely resembled prison. The ones who'd been acquitted rebuilt their careers elsewhere, smaller but intact. The world moved on because it always did. Justice was served imperfectly because perfect justice didn't exist. People made choices and lived with consequences and tried to be better than they'd been while knowing they'd probably fail sometimes. On his daughter's 7th birthday, Adrian took her to the park, the same one where he'd sat after the disastrous deposition, where she'd swung on swings and asked if he was scared of his puzzle. She was bigger now, braver, capable of pumping her legs high enough to go flying. Adrian watched her from a bench, his phone silent in his pocket, his calendar clear of obligations that felt more important than this moment. "Daddy, watch!" she called out, jumping from the swing at the height of its arc. She landed hard, stumbled, fell to her knees. Adrian started to get up, but she was already pushing herself upright, brushing dirt off her jeans, laughing. "Did you see?" she asked, running over. "I jumped so high. I saw." "That was brave. I scraped my knee a little." She showed him the minor injury with pride. "But it was worth it." Adrian cleaned the scrape with a wipe from the first aid kit he always carried now. Put on a bandage featuring cartoon characters she was probably too old for, but still loved. Watched her run back to the swings to try again. Was it worth it? The question Elena had posed in Sarah's article? Adrian thought about everything that had happened: the exposure, the scandal, the trial, the partial justice, the personal cost. Thought about his destroyed reputation and rebuilt life, about Elena's 7 years of planning and uncertain outcome. He didn't know if revenge was ever truly worth its cost. Didn't know if justice achieved through questionable means still counted as justice. Didn't know if the gap between who people wanted to be and who they actually became could ever fully close. But watching his daughter jump from swings and get up laughing, he knew that trying mattered. That standing up when it would be easier to look away created space for something better to exist. That imperfect justice was still better than perfect silence. His phone buzzed, an unknown number. After all this time, his heart still jumped slightly, wondering if it might be Elena with some final word, some conclusion to a story that had ended without real resolution. It was a spam call about his car's extended warranty. Adrian laughed and declined it and put his phone away. Some stories didn't get neat endings. Some questions never received satisfying answers. Some people disappeared into the invisibility they'd chosen and never came back. That was okay. It had to be. Because life wasn't about perfect resolutions or complete justice or revenge that actually satisfied. It was about doing the best you could with incomplete information and imperfect options. About trying to be present for the people who mattered. About building something worth keeping even when the world made that complicated. His daughter called him over to push her on the swings again, and Adrian went, leaving behind thoughts of penthouse parties and federal depositions, and the woman who'd spent 7 years becoming invisible to execute perfect revenge that turned out to be anything but perfect. The city moved around them, millions of people with their own struggles and choices and attempts to navigate systems that weren't designed to be fair. Some would succeed, some would fail. Most would exist somewhere in between, doing their best and hoping it was enough. Adrian pushed his daughter higher, her laughter cutting through the cool air, and decided that maybe it was enough after all. Not perfect, not complete, not everything he'd hoped for when this all started, but enough to keep moving forward, enough to believe tomorrow might be better than today, enough to make the trying worthwhile, even when the outcomes remained uncertain. And in a world where perfect justice was a fantasy and complete redemption impossible, enough was all anyone could really ask for. The sun dropped lower, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Adrian's daughter eventually tired of the swings and they walked home together, her small hand in his, talking about school and friends and what they'd have for dinner. Behind them, the park emptied as families headed home, as the day gave way to evening, as one moment faded into the next in the endless progression of ordinary life. Somewhere in the city, a woman who used to be Elena Ward probably watched the same sunset and thought about the same questions, about worth and cost, and whether revenge delivered what it promised. Adrian hoped she found her answers, hoped she built something new from the ashes of what she'd burned, hoped she learned that invisibility, chosen or forced, was no way to live. But he'd never know. And that was okay too, because some connections exist only for moments, serving their purpose and then ending. Some people touch your life and change it and then disappear. Some stories remain unfinished. The only story Adrian could control was his own. And that story, messy and imperfect as it was, kept going. One day at a time, one choice at a time, one moment of trying to be better than he'd been. It wasn't spectacular. It wasn't the life he'd imagined when he was young and ambitious and thought success meant power and wealth. But it was real. It was honest. It was his. And for the first time in longer than he could remember, that felt like enough.